becoming infinitely stronger starting from Marvel. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 26 My own cabbage has learned to steal pigs. What's going on? Are all these guys calling me today? Bai Ye looked at the unfamiliar number and answered again. Hey Bai, I didn't expect you to be doing so well these days, even on TV. A familiar voice came from the other end of the line. Hearing this voice, Bai Ye almost instinctively frowned. Uncle Lee, what's up? Bai Ye asked back. Nothing much, just checking in on you. After all, you're on TV now, you can't have any blemishes. Hey, the voice on the other end laughed very casually, but the threatening tone made Bai Ye want to vomit. The other party seemed hostile, and Bai Ye, too lazy to argue, asked directly, what do you want? I saw online that many companies are preparing to endorse you. The offers, tisk tisk tisk, it seems legitimate business is indeed faster at making money, Uncle Lee remarked, revealing his purpose. As for what I want, it's simple. I only need $30 million, and that will forever cover up everything you've done before. 30 million? In US dollars. Bai Ye's killing intent surged as he spoke, but he refused, saying, where would I get that much money? As long as you take more orders, the money will flow in like a river. I'll give you 3 days to consider. If you're unwilling by then, Bai, you don't want the whole of America to know about your glorious past, do you? As soon as he finished speaking, Bai Ye's phone went dead, the other party hanging up first. 3 days to consider. Bai Ye looked up at the crescent moon in the sky. For these suicidal guys, 2 days will be enough. The next moment, Bai Ye started running again, heading straight for Chief George's house. Without any hesitation, Bai Ye quickened his pace, running like the wind, and soon arrived at the address George had given him. If there was any advantage to Bai Ye being exposed, it was that he no longer needed to carefully conceal his physical abilities. After all, everyone now knew that he had single-handedly taken down a gang of armed robbers, so it was reasonable for him to be faster and stronger. Standing at the door, Bai Ye gently rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a pretty blonde girl with flowing hair. Hello, it's nice to see you again, Bai Ye greeted the surprised Gwen. You? How did you end up at my house? Gwen looked at Bai Ye in surprise, subconsciously adjusting her blonde hair, then putting her hands behind her back, a blush creeping onto her face. Is this your house? Sheriff George invited me here for dinner, Bai Ye feigned ignorance. Anyone with even a slight understanding of the Marvel storyline knew Gwen had a police chief father, so he wasn't surprised she opened the door. My dad invited you to our house for dinner. Gwen suddenly remembered seeing Bai Ye involved in the robbery earlier that day and asked worriedly, I saw the news this morning. Are you alright? No, but are we going to just stand here talking at the door? Bai Ye glanced inside. Gwen then realized she'd been so engrossed in their conversation that she'd forgotten their surroundings. She pulled Bai Ye's arm and led him inside, then whispered, Dad's in the room. He has a bit of a temper, so please be patient with him. Bai Ye felt a tickle as Gwen's warm breath brushed against his earlobe. A strange sense of deja vu washed over him. This felt too much like a boyfriend visiting his girlfriend's house for the first time. It all felt odd. Thinking this, Bai Ye subconsciously distanced himself from Gwen, because he had already heard footsteps approaching from the kitchen. To avoid the chief's excessive attention, it was best to maintain a proper distance. The next moment, a woman in her 40s, wearing a floral apron, emerged from the kitchen. Her eyes lit up when she saw Bai Ye's appearance, and her tone softened as she said, You must be Bai Ye. Welcome to my home for dinner. I'm George's wife, you can call me Aunt Helen. The food is almost ready, you? Halfway through her sentence, she noticed her daughter standing beside Bai Ye, who was now holding hands intimately with him, her face flushed under her gaze. What's going on here? Helen exclaimed in surprise. At this moment, George also walked out of the room with a serious expression, and seeing the scene before him, his mind went blank. Let me introduce you. This is Bai Ye, also a classmate of Midtown High School. We've met a few times before, but I didn't expect Dad to invite Bai Ye to our home for dinner this time. Gwen said with a smile, holding Bai Ye's right hand. They're alumni, and they've met a few times, and then they're already holding hands. Helen had a lot of complaints but didn't know where to begin, especially seeing Bai Ye's bewildered expression and her daughter's shy look. Clearly, her daughter was the one pursuing him, and she didn't know what to think. George, even more agitated, wanted to say something, but remembering he was the one who invited the other and needed his help, he finally managed to say, "Let's eat first, Bai Ye." He didn't know what to say anymore. Was this going a bit wrong? Based on all the information he had, Bai Ye even came to a somewhat absurd guess. George had invited him over to act as a matchmaker for his daughter? Thinking of this, Bai Ye's gaze towards George changed. He hadn't expected this old man to be so open-minded. With an indescribable sense of unease, Bai Ye, pulled by Gwen, silently sat down at the table in a chair near him. Meanwhile, Stacy's young children, who had been eagerly waiting, watched Bai Ye take his seat, their eyes sparkling. "Brother, look closely. Are you sister's boyfriend?" they asked. "No," George interrupted before Bai Ye could speak. "He's a guest invited by Dad. He's here to discuss something. Don't bother him." "Oh," the children lowered their heads in disappointment. In their minds, if this handsome older brother was their sister's boyfriend, they'd have many opportunities to play with him. George, having just finished admonishing his children, turned to see his daughter intimately huddled with Bai Ye, describing the dishes on the table and asking him in a low voice if he had any dietary restrictions. Seeing Bai Ye's discomfort under his daughter's teasing, George was speechless. His own precious daughter was so eagerly courting him. Chapter 27. Murder's easy, but getting away with it is difficult. At this moment, in Stacy's house, under George's complicated gaze, Bai Ye was struggling to resist the girl's advances. "Bai Ye, what do you like to eat? You also think my mom's steamed sea bass is delicious?" "I like it too. Looks like we have similar tastes in food. Actually, I can cook some things too. I'll cook for you next time. By the way, what do you usually like to do?" Looking at the girl in front of him, her eyes seemingly filled with longing, Bai Ye turned his head away uncomfortably. In this world where looks matter, you never know how proactive a girl can be when facing a boy with top-tier charm. In fact, the girl's pickup lines weren't particularly sophisticated, her persistent approach was even a bit clumsy, but her sincerity was undeniable, so genuine that Bai Ye was finding it hard to resist. What Bai Ye couldn't understand even more was why, despite Gwen's obvious intentions, neither of the two parents at the table had spoken up. "If you don't say something soon, your daughter might start tearing his clothes off." At this moment, in Bai Ye's eyes, Gwen was more troublesome than dealing with 10,000 robbers. After quickly finishing a couple of bites to fill his stomach, Bai Ye turned his gaze to George, who had remained silent throughout. "The chief invited me here today. It can't just be for a meal, right? Now that we've finished eating, can we talk business? Let's talk on the balcony." George had also finished eating and got up to walk towards the balcony, Bai Ye following suit. Hearing that they were going to discuss serious matters, everyone else wisely fell silent, watching the two leave their seats. On the balcony, George leaned on the railing, gazing at the distant houses, and slowly said, "Are you aware that public opinion about the police department has started to deteriorate significantly today?" "What does that have to do with me?" Bai Ye retorted. "If your police force were stronger, they could have dealt with the robbers sooner, and I wouldn't have needed to intervene." "You're right, but the police in New York aren't superhumans like you. They're just a group of well-behaved ordinary people. That's why I'm here with you today." George looked at Bai Ye and said, "We've brought you here today to invite you to join our New York Police Department." "That's it?" Bai Ye looked at George and said, "That's it? What's next?" "What's next?" George was taken aback. "You're asking me to join the police department without any conditions?" Bai Ye frowned. "Conditions? What conditions? Considering your high school student status isn't enough to become a full-fledged police officer, we can only settle for making you an advisor to our police department. The conditions I'm referring to are benefits, power, and the help you can bring me after joining." "What are you thinking? Who would join without conditions?" Bai Ye rolled his eyes. "Well, the police department is a bit tight on funds, but..." George was interrupted by Bai Ye halfway through his sentence. "All right, no need to consider it, I refuse," Bai Ye said without hesitation. This penniless guy was still trying to get out of the government? Did he really think he was Song Jiang? "You guys should just go back to what you were doing, handle those petty thieves properly, and leave the tough guys to the superheroes," Bai Ye said bluntly. In his view, It was only natural that the NYPD was useless. How could a bunch of ordinary people fight against supervillains? Spider-Man had just mutated, and Iron Man was still a playboy, so in the eyes of the public, the NYPD seemed a bit useless. After all, expectations and capabilities were completely mismatched. But when superheroes and supervillains exploded in the future, and people got used to all kinds of godlike battles, the public would understand that in a superhero brawl, the police were just there to make up the numbers. After all, you can't expect $1 to be worth $10. Accepting the fact that the NYPD are ordinary people will lower expectations a lot. George was somewhat annoyed by Bai Ye's attitude. Hand it over to those superheroes? You mean those people who haven't even shown their faces yet? Who knows what their real identities are? Without legal oversight, New York's security would be in complete chaos by now. Oh, right. Bai Ye was too lazy to argue with him and nodded repeatedly. Since we've finished eating and I've refused your request, and there's nothing else here, I'll head back now. See you another time. Wait a minute, George called out to Bai Ye. Is there anything else? Bai Ye turned around and asked. About Gwen, I know, I'll keep my distance from her. Bai Ye gave an okay sign. No, maybe you can come over for meals sometime in the future, George said somewhat aggrievedly. He was genuinely dissatisfied with Bai Ye's personality, and that he had killed too many people and was too cruel, but his daughter liked him. There will be a time. Bai Ye nodded speechlessly, walked onto the balcony, and insisted on leaving despite Stacy's family's reluctant attempts to persuade him to stay. He had other things to do that night. Stepping onto the street, the cold night wind chilled Bai Ye, making his heart grow even colder. Thinking of Uncle Lee's phone call, a murderous intent gradually crept into Bai Ye's mind. But he couldn't act now. Those familiar with murder knew that killing was easy, but getting away with it was difficult. If Uncle Lee had called him that very night and died at home, and he had just demonstrated the ability to commit a crime, the police could easily identify him by checking the call records. Therefore, for Bai Ye, the real problem wasn't killing Uncle Lee, but killing him without being caught by the NYPD. And Bai Ye already had a clue how to do that. Wandering the streets, Bai Ye's mind raced, recalling the various records he had before leaving the underworld. With his mental state at 1.6, past memories surged like a tide, flooding Bai Ye's mind. These memories included the names, appearances, and home addresses of various New York City gang leaders. Soon, through his recollections, Bai Ye quickly locked onto his first target, Brown Roderick, the leader of the counter-gang. With his goal in mind, Bai Ye walked along the main road that was under surveillance, returned to the club, and then exited through a back door without any surveillance, quietly sneaking into a nearby convenience store. Avoiding the cameras, he took a set of clothes and a pair of shoes from the store, left the equivalent amount in US dollars, and left. Half an hour later, Bai Ye, having retrieved the items he wanted, hesitated for a moment before heading towards his home. Before making his move, he realized he had left something important at home. Without it, it would be difficult to achieve his objective. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28: Establishing a Character. Nighttime, Brooklyn, New York. On the second floor of a large villa spanning several hundred square meters, a brown-haired man in his 40s or 50s lay leisurely on a sofa, completely relaxed, enjoying the automated services of a blonde woman before him. The house wasn't empty. 4 fully armed bodyguards stood guard nearby, their eyes fixed straight ahead. As the leader of the anti-King gang, Brown Roderick had painstakingly climbed to this position, and naturally, he cherished his life. Even in such a private setting, he was cautious, fearing he might not live to see the end. His bodyguards were all high-paid veterans, each a muscular man capable of taking on 3 men unarmed, equipped with bulletproof vests and handguns, ensuring no one could threaten his life. Standing respectfully before Brown Roderick was a burly man with a menacing face, his second-in-command. "Has the AK gang been acting a bit too restless lately?" Brown casually remarked, looking at his second-in-command. "We've had some recent conflicts with them over business dealings, and they haven't been very clean. 3 or 4 of our underlings have already been hospitalized," the deputy explained. "Damn it, we agreed to develop the underground drug business together, but lately their behavior has become increasingly shady. Looks like we have to take them down, Brown said, as his bodyguard suddenly moved aside to block his way. What's going on? Why are you all so tense all of a sudden? Brown asked, puzzled. Then he heard a slightly heavy footstep growing louder in his ear. Someone was coming upstairs. Where are the bodyguards downstairs? Why didn't they stop him? Brown thought with a hint of panic. This sudden turn of events brought Brown back to his normal state, while the blonde woman in front of him also got up and shrank into Brown's arms, somewhat frightened. Thump. 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 The heavy footsteps reached Brown's ears, and the bodyguard warily raised his pistol, aiming it at the stairs. Soon, an unmasked head slowly rose from the bottom of the stairs. Brown's eyes widened, his gaze passing through the bodyguard's figure to the person's head, a sense of fear creeping into his heart. What a face it was! It looked as if it had been scorched by fire, even its hair was gone, its entire face covered in scars, not a single patch of intact skin remained, making it impossible to discern its original features. Only a pair of pitch-black eyes stared intently at them, like a demon carved from hell. The instant the man's appearance appeared, a piercing scream erupted from the blonde woman in Brown's arms. This scream was like a signal, and the four bodyguards, who were on high alert, fired their pistols almost simultaneously, aiming at the man's exposed head. Bang! Bullets fired at the same time from four directions struck the man, but were immediately blocked by a heavy iron door. In Brown's eyes, his nearly ton stainless steel blast door had been removed at some point and was being held in front of the man as a shield. No wonder the footsteps had sounded so heavy earlier, carrying such a large door was bound to be heavy. The man raised the iron door in his hands and continued to slowly walk up the stairs. During this time, the bodyguard's bullets continued, but none could penetrate the defenses of his own door. Who are you? Talk to me. Brown tossed the blonde woman aside, backing away as he tried to communicate. In response, the man grabbed the iron door and hurled it with terrifying force, using it as a projectile. Boom! The unstoppable iron door, carrying immense kinetic energy, struck the two bodyguards who had fired their guns. With a dull thud, the door slammed into Brown, killing all three instantly. The other henchmen and the two bodyguards lay lifeless on the ground, fruit knives piercing their skulls, dead. Judging from the brand on the handles, the knives were stolen from their home. From the man's appearance to the deaths of the six, the entire process took less than 5 seconds. The blonde woman, once a plaything, now a survivor, cowered in a corner, too terrified to utter a sound. What awaited her was the man's hoarse voice finally speaking. Don't worry, I don't kill innocent people who can't resist. Get out. After saying that, the blonde finally dared to look up, only to see the man drawing a giant S-shaped bloodstain on the ground with the blood of several dead people, resembling the scene of some cult ritual. After doing this, the man really did as he said, not even glancing at her once, and silently walked down the stairs and disappeared into the villa, just as he had come. Name, Bai Ye. Lifespan 18/500 strength. 1.6 plus 0.2 constitution. 1.6 plus 0.2 spirit. 1.6 plus charisma. 0.3 plus attribute points to be used. 0.2. Description, total attribute points exceeded 6, talent 2, the composure of the strong, activated, attribute points to be used plus 0.1. You used sulfuric acid to damage the skin on your head and hands, and the total recovery time was 184 minutes. Repeated 781 times, constitution increased by 0.1. Repeated 215 times, spirit increased by 0.1. Looking at the description on the attribute panel, Bai Ye, who had just killed someone and left the villa, scratched the scorched skin on his face. The process of regrowth after being disfigured with sulfuric acid was unbearably itchy for him. That's right, sulfuric acid disfigurement. Bai Ye had secretly returned home to get the sulfuric acid he needed to disfigure himself. Only by completely altering his appearance and fingerprints could he prevent people from associating him with a murderer who annihilated the gang. Before this, Bai Ye had already conducted experiments on his body and successfully understood what a physique of 1.5 meant, a leap in life level. If a physique below 1.5 only meant someone with strong recovery abilities, then reaching 1.5 meant Bai Ye was essentially a Tommy who couldn't split himself. As long as the injury didn't kill him instantly, given enough time, he could slowly recover to his original state through eating. Even if he was cut in half at the waist, given enough time, he could regrow his lower body. These were reasonable deductions Bai Ye made after a series of destructive tests on his body. And as described on the panel, Bai Ye only needed 3 hours for his face, disfigured by sulfuric acid, to return to normal, his charm to its normal 1.4 level, and even his hair could regrow. Tonight is the first step for Bai Ye to kill Uncle Lee. He will kill a gang leader as a sacrifice to create a vengeful evil god in other people's minds. This person is unrelated to Bai Ye, has a disfigured face, and is full of hatred for the underworld. Chapter 29 Fitness Equipment. At 7 o'clock on Thursday morning, Peter Parker awoke from his slumber, rubbing his blonde hair and feeling every muscle in his body brimming with power. What's going on? My physique is like those bodybuilders, Peter thought to himself, bewildered by his muscular upper body reflected in the mirror. He awkwardly assumed a boxing stance, his right hand flashing out 2 punches, the air currents from his punches even causing the full-length mirror in front of him to shake slightly. Although he didn't know what had caused his increased physical strength, he was still excitedly adapting to his now strong body. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, New York, Chief George, who had just arrived at work, looked grimly at the 3 corpses crushed and deformed by an iron gate and a large S written in blood on the ground. They had just walked up the villa through the front door and found that almost everyone inside had been killed. The only survivor was the trembling blonde woman beside him. Could you tell me the specifics of what happened yesterday? While the other officers were reviewing the surveillance footage, George looked at the only survivor in the entire villa. Through the blonde woman's fragmented account, George learned that the perpetrator was a terrifying-looking man with scars all over his head. Judging from his actions, he was definitely a superhuman, preliminarily identified as a mutant. At this moment, an investigating officer approached and handed him a computer containing footage from nearby surveillance cameras. George opened the computer and began to review it. Sure enough, he saw a disfigured man in black brazenly storming in through the front door, killing everyone who stood in his way. With superhuman speed and strength, the man's actions were exceptionally ruthless. From bodyguards to hunting dogs, they were all killed without any real resistance. George, do you have any ideas? Deputy Chief Mudd arrived at the scene and asked George as he reviewed the surveillance footage. While watching the surveillance footage, George said, the deceased was a gangster. It's possible a rival gang hired someone to kill him. They've been having conflicts with the AK gang lately, and I was thinking of taking advantage of that to close the net. Let's start our investigation from that angle. Also, the killer's appearance was completely disfigured. It's possible someone persecuted by the gang suddenly awakened mutant abilities and returned for revenge. We can start from that point. Finally, check the villa for any fingerprints left by the killer, and also check the deceased's recent phone records, George suggested. Mudd nodded, then asked, by the way, the mayor asked you to recruit that young man. Did you do anything about it? George shook his head and said, I asked him, but he didn't agree. It seems there's no hope of him being re-elected as the next chief. You'd better try your best. You're just giving up like that? You didn't even try. The deputy chief was speechless. I see you only asked, without even making a decent effort. Why don't I help you? Put some pressure on his school. Make joining the police academy a graduation requirement. If he doesn't agree, he can forget about graduating smoothly. That way, he'll naturally agree. Hearing Mudd say this, George paused the surveillance and turned around solemnly, saying, I only found out yesterday that my daughter likes him. Although I don't really like that guy. I can't possibly hinder my daughter's love life. So what do you mean? New York is in a mess right now. Who knows when a cop will die? It's good that I, the New York police chief, am stepping down. Your experience and achievements over the years are enough. No matter who the next mayor is, the next chief will most likely be you, George said. Seeing George's earnest gaze, Mudd could only abandon his idea of continuing to pester Bai Ye, and said helplessly, I was just thinking of recruiting that kid and then handing this case over to him. Hearing Mudd say this, George laughed. That's why I don't want him to join the police force. New York is getting more and more chaotic. If he really becomes my son-in-law, I don't want my daughter to be a widow at such a young age. As the two were chatting and laughing, a police officer ran over in a panic and said, Chief, we just received news that another family annihilation has occurred not far from here. What? George's expression changed slightly. Who are the victims? The leader of the JK gang, Ringo Murray. After the officer finished speaking, the two got up to go to the crime scene to check the situation. Inside the club, Bai Ye was looking at himself in the mirror. After a whole night of recovery, His appearance, which had been burned by sulfuric acid, had returned to perfect state. Even his eyebrows and hair had grown back. It has to be said that for Bai Ye, destroying 2 gang strongholds in one night was a bit rushed. Although the instructions said it would take 3 hours to fully recover, after 2 hours, Bai Ye's face began to regain its human form, forcing him to race against time to complete the mission before the disfigurement buff wore off. But after going through such a long and complicated process, no one should associate that murderer with me, right? Bai Ye thought. As long as he wiped out 10 or 8 families of gang leaders in New York, and then mixed in Uncle Lee's entire family, plus the disfigurement disguise, no one would suspect that he was just a pawn in Uncle Lee's scheme. Perfect. Click. Just as Bai Ye was examining himself in the mirror, the gym door behind him opened, and Smith, who had gotten up early, walked in. Bai, the new gym equipment you had me order last night has arrived and is outside now, Smith said. Oh, take me there quickly. Bai Ye's eyes lit up, and he turned around and went outside with Smith, where they saw several lumps of cast iron loaded on a forklift. On the outermost layer are 2 cubes, each about 0.5 centimeters on each side and weighing a ton. At the top of each cube is a handle resembling a stone lock, allowing one to lift it with one hand. This was a piece of fitness equipment that Bai Ye had specially commissioned Smith to have custom-made at a foundry yesterday. Because of its extremely simple design, it was easily completed and delivered in a single day with an extra fee. These over-a-ton iron blocks are a perfect match for his current progress, allowing him to exercise with one in each hand. And when his physical abilities improve further, there's no need to worry. He can simply have an even larger hollow iron block made and nest this one inside for further training. With this tool, at least for a considerable period, he won't have to worry about the training facilities falling behind. Bending down to pick up the 2 iron blocks, feeling their heavy weight, Bai Ye greeted Smith and entered the gym. Chapter 30. Time feels like years. Early in the morning, feeling the surge of energy within him, a triumphant Peter Parker slowly descended the stairs. Aunt May and Uncle Ben had already prepared breakfast for him on the table. Seeing Peter come down, Aunt May smiled gently. You've been sleeping since you got back yesterday noon. Come and eat, I cooked extra. Thank you, Aunt May. I feel like I could eat a whole cow right now, Peter said gratefully, taking his seat to eat. While eating, Ben Parker casually turned on the television, which was broadcasting the morning news. On the New York City morning news, a reporter stood in front of the bank robbed the previous day, formally announcing, as you can see, yesterday morning's robbery has officially ended with 1 security guard injured, 6 robbers dead, and 1 robber incapacitated. Another robbery in New York City yesterday, Peter asked, his eyes glued to the television as he ate. Of course, it was quite a big deal. Even I heard about it, Uncle Ben replied. This didn't happen because of the NYPD, but because one of the hostages subdued him, the reporter said on TV. A moment later, a photo of White Knight was conveniently inserted and placed beside the reporter. The moment Peter saw the handsome face in the photo, his wolfing down food movement stopped. He stared blankly at the TV, his mouth full of food bulging as he involuntarily exclaimed, Wang Difa, this young man is very handsome, isn't he? Yesterday, many young girls at my workplace secretly printed out his photo with a color printer, Aunt May said mischievously. No, Peter was completely speechless. He felt as if the whole world had changed after he woke up. Not only had his strength suddenly increased, but his classmate was also suddenly on TV, killing 6 armed robbers. What was happening to the world? After stammering for a while, seeing the clueless Aunt May and Uncle Ben, Peter chose not to explain further. He quickly wolfed down the food on the table and boarded the school bus. Halfway there, he tried dialing Bai Ye's phone number, but received a message that the phone was switched off. Unable to get immediate confirmation, he could only sigh. Looking up, he saw his goddess, Mary Jane, walking towards him with a smile. Seeing his goddess's beautiful face, Peter's heart inevitably raced. He began to think today was his lucky day. But then he heard Mary Jane look at him with concern and say, Peter, do you know where Bai Ye went? We tried calling him yesterday, but we couldn't get through. Can you contact him? Peter's expectant expression vanished, and under Mary Jane's disappointed gaze, he shook his head dejectedly, indicating he didn't know. At noon, in the gym, Bai Ye, having once again pushed his body to its limits due to the arrival of new training equipment, sat cross-legged on the floor. As his hands formed hand seals, a continuous stream of purple energy surged from his face, swirling light clouds above his head. The aura of condensing purple energy into a mist that swirls above the head during cultivation was a power never before possessed by any practitioner of the purple cloud divine art. Behind him, Smith, drenched in sweat, relentlessly swung a steel rod at Bai Ye's back, yet couldn't even budge him an inch. Half an hour later, Bai Ye raised his hands in a 5 hearts to heaven posture, then slowly finished his practice, feeling the additional wisp of internal energy within his body, completely satisfied. The purple cloud divine skill requires mediocre individuals to meditate for half a day to generate even a single trace of purple cloud true ki, and even a peerless genius needs 15 minutes to produce just one. According to the description by Gentleman Sword in the group, the martial arts world judges internal energy based on the amount of true ki a mediocre person cultivates. 1 trace of true ki is equivalent to a day's worth of cultivation for an ordinary person. 10 traces equal 1 wisp. 36 wisps constitute a year's worth of internal energy, 360 wisps equal 10 years' worth, and 3,600 wisps equal 100 years' worth. Bai Ye, with a constitution attribute of 1.8, can generate 1 wisp of purple cloud true ki every 3 minutes, more than 10 times faster than his initial self. He only needs 16 hours of cultivation to possess a year's worth of internal energy. For an ordinary person, a genius's 1 day of cultivation is equivalent to an ordinary person's 1 year of cultivation. Perhaps this is the origin of the idiom "a day feels like a year." Having finished his training, Bai Ye turned to Smith, who was already exhausted and panting, and said, "Your stamina is seriously affecting my training progress." "Hey, Bai, that's a bit much? For an ordinary person like me, being able to strike at full power for 2 or 3 minutes is already considered having plenty of stamina." "Not everyone is like you," Smith complained. "I know, I'm not criticizing you, I'm just thinking of solutions to improve your physique," Bai Ye pondered. "You could hire a few more people to beat you up," Smith suggested, but Bai Ye immediately rejected it. "At my current rate of progress, I don't trust anyone else. They might report me at any time. Only you can help me with my training." Bai Ye thought to himself, "I have too many secrets. It's not suitable for me to have too much contact with others while training. Besides, Smith's personality is easy to manipulate, and I know where he lives. Even if you were to reveal it, he would have to consider my retaliation. Others aren't so safe." Hearing Bai Ye's trust in him so much, Smith, unaware of his inner thoughts, couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. Bai Ye pondered for a moment and said, "I'll teach you the purple cloud divine skill, the martial art that made purple clouds appear on my face when I was meditating. Chinese Kung Fu." Smith's eyes widened. "Bai, you're going to teach me something like that?" Bai Ye said. He planned to write down the purple cloud divine skill from memory tonight and then give it to Smith to practice. His kindness wasn't really about getting Smith to help him improve his physique. After all, with Smith's aptitude, it would be quite an achievement if he could even understand the purple cloud divine skill within 10 years. The main reason was for advertising his deal with the club owner a month later. Yes, the so-called billion-dollar deal Bai Ye mentioned yesterday was the purple cloud divine skill. The reason the time was set for a month later was because Bai Ye currently lacked confidence in his strength, so he planned to train for a month to see the results. If his strength was still weak after a month, he would simply cancel the meeting and wait until he was strong enough to complete the transaction. The initiative was in his own hands. "By the way, it's almost noon now, you should go back first." Bai Ye checked the time and said, "You look quite tired this morning, rest a bit, come back after 3 o'clock." "Thank you, boss," Smith said gratefully. After hearing that Bai Ye's Kung Fu could be replicated and that he was going to teach it to him, he wished he could immediately become Bai Ye's apprentice. Watching Smith leave the club, Bai Ye took out a glass jar from the shadows. Inside was sulfuric acid with a purity of 98.3%. Chapter 31 Cleaning Up the Filth. Looking at the sulfuric acid in front of him, Bai Ye took a deep breath and pressed his palms firmly into the solution. Immediately after immersing his hands in the water, he could clearly feel the skin on his hands dehydrating and carbonizing under the corrosive effects of the sulfuric acid. However, given the current strength of Bai Ye's skin, it might take several tens of minutes for noticeable wounds to appear. To end this process as quickly as possible, he needed to use some physical methods. Feeling his hands gradually warming up, Bai Ye began rubbing the surface of his skin to ensure the sulfuric acid could penetrate more quickly. Bai Ye discovered that as his mental attributes increased, his pain tolerance also increased daily. Pain that would have previously made him faint could now be endured without flinching. 2 minutes later, Bai Ye slowly lifted his hands from the sulfuric acid. The fingerprints and cuticles on his palms had been completely corroded, and blood was continuously flowing down. A dozen seconds after his hands were removed from the sulfuric acid, the bleeding began to stop thanks to his powerful healing abilities. The charred palms, which had been bleeding profusely, quickly lost their pain, replaced by a strong, tingling sensation of flesh regenerating. Next was the head. Bai Ye closed his eyes tightly and, facing the somewhat murky sulfuric acid below, unhesitatingly buried his entire face in it. Half an hour later, the instructions on Bai Ye's screen read, "You used sulfuric acid to damage the skin of your head and hands. Total recovery time: 156 minutes. Repeat 132 times, constitution increases by 0.1. Repeat 65 times, spirit increases by 0.1. Looking at the information on the screen, Bai Ye's terrifying face couldn't help but furrow. Yesterday, the complete healing time was 3 hours, but today it had been reduced by 30 minutes in just one morning. Moreover, the damage to the skin from the sulfuric acid required more time as his constitution improved, making his actions even more urgent. Actually, he had considered dislocating an arm or tearing off his face skin to better conceal his identity, but considering the difficulty of dealing with excess body tissue after each operation, he had to abandon the idea. Bai Ye quickly put away the sulfuric acid, changed his clothes, donned a black cloak, and walked out the back door. He followed a deserted, unmonitored path towards Manhattan, New York City. At that moment, in Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, a Chinese man in his 40s with a small mustache leaned back in a recliner. He wore a traditional Chinese robe and constantly toyed with walnuts. Beside him stood a servile young man. "Xiao Wang, I heard that 2 gangs in the slums got taken down," the man asked the young man. "Yes, Uncle Lee," Xiao Wang replied respectfully. "According to the cops, it was a disfigured man who did it, and they suspect it's a mutant's revenge. New York's been anything but peaceful lately," Uncle Lee sighed, shaking his head. "No wonder the kid Bai always committed his crimes in smaller cities. New York's a den of thieves. Who knows which big fish he'll provoke." "Uncle Lee, do you think Bai Ye will agree to give us 30 million? Xiao Wang asked from the side. "He's a smart man. With his current fame, he can earn back 30 million in no time. For him, it's not worth fighting to the death for that much money," Uncle Lee said confidently, then grinned maliciously. "I'll live off him for the rest of my life." As he spoke, Chinatown outside the mansion was already bustling. In broad daylight, a bald man with burned scars covering his head walked steadily towards the center of the street right under everyone's noses. "What are you doing?" Bai Ye's unsightly appearance caused the New York policeman to block his way, ready to question him. But Bai Ye, too lazy to waste words, slapped him, knocking him unconscious to the ground. Under the fearful and wary gazes of those around him, he stepped over the New York policeman and continued forward. Just then, before everyone's eyes, Bai Ye's steps faltered, stopping before a large mahogany door. Looking at the mansion he had frequented a year ago, Bai Ye raised his foot and stomped forward. Boom! With a terrifying burst of force, the thick bolt snapped instantly, and the heavy mahogany door was kicked away by Bai Ye, breaking in half mid-air before crashing down. If knocking out the policeman could be considered superhuman strength, this was definitely beyond the realm of ordinary people. The crowd watching from afar took several steps back again. The 2 gang members who had been guarding the mansion, staring at the suddenly flying door and the terrifying man before it, were filled with fear and instinctively asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Without hesitation, Bai Ye was already standing in front of the 2 men, his hands like vices, gripping their necks and twisting them forcefully. Crack! Crack! With crisp sounds of bones breaking, the 2 gang members could only clutch their severely twisted necks and fall to the ground in agony. Before losing consciousness, they heard a hoarse voice from a man's mouth, an answer to their question, "Come to cleanse the filth of the world." At this moment, the other gang guards in the mansion reacted, but before they could draw their guns, Bai Ye's murderous gaze had already locked onto them. For Bai Ye, the distance of only 6 or 7 meters was less than a second. With a powerful stomp, he thrust himself into their sides with the immense force of the impact. In their eyes, Bai Ye's scarred hands suddenly magnified, finally pressing firmly against their skulls. Thump, 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 thump. Although the contact was only momentary, when Bai Ye's hand released its grip, clear handprints appeared on their foreheads. Under the immense downward impact, Bai Ye forcefully pressed the necks of several men into their chests, breaking their cervical vertebrae into several pieces. Their legs gave way, and they knelt on the ground, lifeless. At that moment, the door to the room was violently pushed open, and Xiao Wang, the young man who had been fawning over Uncle Li, rushed out, shouting, "Don't you know any manners? Uncle Li is resting inside, why are you making such a racket?" But before he could even see his surroundings, Bai Ye's fist rapidly enlarged in front of him, filling his entire field of vision. A scene reminiscent of a watermelon exploding was replicated on Xiao Wang's shoulder. Bright red liquid and pinkish white jelly instantly splattered out, covering half the room behind him. Uncle Li lay in his chair, staring blankly at the pile of flesh on his body. A metallic smell assaulted his nostrils, making him want to vomit. Seeing Uncle Li's bewildered expression, Bai Ye grinned, revealing gleaming white teeth. If it weren't for this old wall lamp calling him out of the blue, he wouldn't have suffered so much. Under Uncle Li's bewildered gaze, Bai Ye turned around and slowly closed the door. As the door slammed shut, a painful scream emanated from the room, only gradually subsiding a full minute later. Chapter 32 Peter, my back. 7 minutes later, in Chinatown, the New York police arrived belatedly. Cautious, the lead officer cautiously entered the courtyard through the broken gate. There lay 5 or 6 bodies, each killed instantly, and a headless male corpse at the doorway. Seeing the room mostly covered in blood and gore, the officers gasped in horror. In the very center of the room, a blood-soaked S conspicuously proclaimed its presence. Beside the bloodstains, the body of gang leader Uncle Li was intact, except for a large portion of the back of his head that had been ground away. After a thorough search, it was discovered that everyone in the entire courtyard, from top to bottom, had died violently, and the entire crime had occurred in less than 2 minutes, killing someone easier than killing a chicken. Contact headquarters immediately. The leader of the Red Bell Society is dead at home. Surveillance footage confirms the killer is the same person as the perpetrator in the other 2 gang massacres last night, Branch Chief Morgan said gravely. Unlike other murder targets, this is a hunt. The target is the entire New York underworld. A reasonable guess is that the killer's face was disfigured by a gang, creating a deep-seated hatred for the entire underworld. Having gained power, he didn't hesitate to seek revenge. Inside the club, Bai Ye gently patted his face, which had taut and returned to normal. After taking down Uncle Li's gang, he returned. During the healing process of his facial skin, he discovered that his internal energy also aided recovery, saving him about 1/10 of the healing time. Although Uncle Li is gone, I can't stop. I've already wiped out 3 gangs. From now on, I'll kill 4 more gang leaders a day and send them down to make it a round number, Bai Ye thought to himself. After all, he couldn't just stop killing after killing Uncle Li. He only needed to deal with the most important one first, then he wouldn't have to rush the rest of the killing. Actually, Bai Ye wanted to wait until after the 4th or 5th gang before making a move against Uncle Li, but because the target of the disguise was too clear, he was afraid Uncle Li would simply hide. Of course, an even more ridiculous possibility was that Uncle Li might use his past as leverage to force him to protect him. But right now, the New York underworld is probably on edge. Making a move now might mean encountering mutants or something similar, which would be troublesome, Bai Ye worried. With this worry in mind, Bai Ye picked up the 1-ton weightlifting iron again and began training. Improving himself was the only right thing to do now. As he focused on his training, around 3 p.m., Coach Smith arrived at the gym and began striking Bai Ye's back with a steel rod, repeatedly hitting his skin. Name, Bai Ye. Lifespan, 18/700 strength, 1.7 plus 0.2 constitution, 1.7 plus 0.2 spirit, 1.6 plus charisma, 1.4 plus attribute points available, 0.2. When it reached 5 p.m., Bai Ye looked at the 0.1 increase in both strength and constitution, comparing it to his previous physical attributes when his actual strength had just reached 1.8. In fact, the reason his attributes were improving so quickly was entirely due to the 0.2 attribute points added. At Bai Ye's normal training speed, theoretically, each 0.1 increase would take even longer, but since those 2 extra attribute points didn't affect the experience bar, only increasing damage when fighting monsters. His leveling speed was like having a multiplier experience card, it simply wouldn't stop. Now I can easily lift a 3.4-ton object with one arm. In terms of strength, The difference between 1.8 and 1.9 should be around 0.7 tons, which is indeed more than the increase from 1.7 to 1.8, but still only a limited amount, so the increase in strength on this attribute panel must follow an arithmetic progression, Bai Ye guessed. Glancing at the time, Bai Ye turned to Smith and said, "It's 5 o'clock. You can go back now, resting so soon today?" Smith asked, puzzled. "I have something to do today, I'm going to see a friend. You can rest early and come back tomorrow morning. I can teach you martial arts," Bai Ye explained. "Tomorrow? Okay, I'll come tomorrow morning," Smith said excitedly, then left happily. Looking at Smith's silly grin, Bai Ye shook his head helplessly. This guy had no understanding of martial arts at all, probably still clinging to the illusion that he could reach Bai Ye's level in 10 days or half a month. With Smith's aptitude at most 1.2, that's only enough to cultivate a trace of internal energy in half an hour. It would take at least a year and a half to see any results. There was a way to raise him to a level where he could help Bai Ye, directly infuse him with internal energy. According to the information on the gentleman's sword, infusing internal energy of the same source would consume nearly 20%, meaning that only 16 years of 20 years worth of internal energy would remain in the recipient's body. Using Smith as a ready-made advertisement would greatly increase the value of the Xixia Divine skill transaction a month later. This is a popular skill that anyone can quickly master as long as they're willing to help. As for training methods to improve resilience, he already has a short-term goal, to become Peter Parker, Spider-Man. As for the long term, he's already started having Smith contact manufacturers of stamping presses to try and produce a double-A grade stamping press that meets his requirements in terms of power and speed. However, it won't be ready in less than 10 days to 2 weeks, and he can't waste time during this period. While thinking, Bai Ye took out his phone from the pocket of a nearby rack, turned it on, found Peter's number, and dialed it. After a ring, the call was answered, and Bai Ye said without waiting for a reply, "Peter, do you have time now?" "Bai, what do you want?" "I just fell and hurt my back, I might need some time to rest," Peter said, rubbing his back, from the street corner. He had just been testing his web-weaving abilities on a high-rise building when he accidentally fell and hit his back, and now he was a little short of breath. "Oh, really?" Bai Ye's lips curled up as he held a phone. "I found a job that pays at least $20,000 a month, and you can work part-time after school. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? $20,000 a month." "Bai, where are you now?" "I'm coming right now." Trusting Bai Ye completely, Peter Parker asked without hesitation. "It's not far from my house, at the Minds Fitness Club." "Check how far it is. You can take a taxi, and I'll reimburse the fare." "The Minds Fitness Club. I understand. I'll be there in half an hour." Peter hung up, stretched, and felt a cracking sound in his back, as if he felt a little better. "What kind of part-time job pays $20,000 a month? And I haven't even asked Bai about the bank robbery yet." Peter Parker shook his head, then headed towards the address Bai Ye had given him. As for taking a taxi? Forget it. Even though Bai Ye said he could get reimbursed, his family's financial situation still made him subconsciously try to save money. With his current physical condition, as long as he ran fast, he could easily reach his destination within half an hour. Chapter 33 Just a minor superficial injury. Inside the Minds gym, Bai Ye, wearing a mask, stood at the entrance waiting for Peter. A couple of minutes later, seeing the blond boy jogging towards them, Bai Ye's eyes lit up. He waved and said, "Peter, over here." "Bai, the whole class has been talking about you today," Peter said, stepping forward. "I had no idea you were this good. Let's go inside." Bai Ye waved, leading Peter into the club. The first floor was filled with bodybuilders. Bai Ye bypassed them and went straight to the private gym on the third floor, where the atmosphere immediately quieted down. Peter surveyed the room's furnishings, paying particular attention to the several metal blocks in the corner, then asked, "Bai, you still haven't told me what that 20,000 yuan part-time job is." Bai Ye, with his back to Peter, said, "That's another matter. Let's spar first." "Spar?" Peter was stunned. A tingling sensation shot from his neck to his brain. Bai Ye twisted rapidly, his right leg like a giant axe, kicking powerfully towards Peter's head. Bai Ye's trouser leg whistled as it scraped against the air. If a normal person were to take that kick squarely, their head would likely be sliced off. Peter leaned back, feeling the air brush against his nose, and said angrily, "Bai, what are you trying to do?" Just wanted to test your reflexes. You wouldn't have been hurt even if you hadn't moved. Bai Ye withdrew his right leg and laughed. Now, as compensation, you can give me a punch. As long as you don't kill me on the spot, you can do whatever you want. You said it. Slightly frightened, Peter clenched his fist. Unsure of Bai Ye's physical resilience, he gently punched Bai Ye in the abdomen. It was just a playful punch, causing Bai Ye no pain, but he had already achieved his goal. Description: attack detected. Analyzing opponent's data. Name: Peter Parker. Strength 3.0, agility 2.6, constitution 2.8, spirit 4.2, charisma 1.1. Looking at the newly appeared information on the panel, Bai Ye was also stunned for a moment. How exactly are the values on this panel calculated? I remember Spider-Man in the movies could stop a 100-ton train traveling at 9 meters per second in 30 seconds. That means his strength is at least 70 tons, more than 20 times mine. As it turns out, aside from mental strength, the difference between my and Spider-Man's attribute panel values is less than double, although this might be because he's just awakened and his physical potential hasn't been fully developed. Finishing his thought, Bai Ye turned to look at the oblivious Peter beside him, a harmless, warm smile on his face. Peter, come help me train. Train? Peter Parker hesitated for a moment. Yes, the part-time job I mentioned with a monthly salary of $20,000 is helping me with my impact resistance training. Bai Ye got up, walked to his backpack in the corner, pulled out a thick wad of US dollars, and returned to Peter. Before Peter, whose eyes were glazed over, Bai Ye waved a wad of banknotes in his hand, his tone incredibly tempting. If you agree, I can advance you a month's salary. Looking at the money so close, so easily within reach, Peter maintained his composure and said with some difficulty, but what kind of training can I do for you? It's simple. You just need to keep hitting me with that stick over there. That's my training method. Just be careful not to kill me, Bai Ye said. You know about the changes in my body today? Peter's eyes widened in surprise, even wondering if Bai Ye was behind his increased strength. Of course I know. As for how I know, everyone has their secrets. How about we keep some distance? He was too lazy to lie or deceive, so he simply said nothing. Okay, if it's just about hitting you with a stick, I accept this part-time job. Peter didn't ask any further questions but chose to accept the offer. Very good, let's begin now. To Peter's astonishment, Bai Ye grabbed the 2-ton iron lump from the corner, planted his feet firmly in a horse stance, and urged, "What are you standing there for? Hit me with a stick now." Okay. Peter gripped the steel rod tightly, wielding it with restraint, and struck Bai Ye's back without feeling a thing. Use some force, don't be afraid of killing me, Bai Ye urged, and the next moment he felt a slight pain in his back from the steel rod. Yes, this strength is barely acceptable. Of course, if it were 4 or 5/10 stronger, it would be even better. Bai Ye nodded in satisfaction. This strike had already inflicted more damage than Smith's. Hearing Bai Ye's praise, Peter felt a little strange and increased his strength a bit more. This strike is perfect. Keep this strength, and increase the speed. Each strike should ideally maintain this strength while hitting different parts of my back at the fastest possible frequency. Bai Ye was extremely satisfied with Peter's massage-style blows. Soon, the sound of flesh being violently lashed echoed throughout the gym under Peter's control. The steel rod lashed Bai Ye's back at a rate of 7 or 8 strikes per second. Each strike left a noticeable red welt on Bai Ye's back, which was now as tough as rhinoceros hide. 4 or 5 minutes later, Bai Ye was still gripping the iron rod with both hands, his feet firmly planted in a horse stance, but his vest had torn open, revealing a bloodied, mangled back. Seeing this, Peter had to stop and said, "Aren't you really in pain? Your back is bleeding. It's just a superficial injury. It'll heal in a while. This is the best way to get stronger," Bai Ye said nonchalantly, looking at the progress displayed on the instructions. With a boost from Peter's massager, at the current rate, he only needed another 100,000 blows. That is, in another 4 or 5 hours, his recently increased physique would increase by another 0.1, at which point Bai Ye's physical condition would be completely refreshed, with no wounds left. Not to mention his superhuman healing ability. A wound like this, where even the bones weren't broken, is really just a superficial injury that will heal in a few hours. Looking at the blood-stained steel rod in his hand, Peter's face darkened. "Even if you can accept it, I still can't bring myself to do it. The blood from your back has splattered all over my clothes." "Hey, You're so picky about your work. If you can't handle it, then hit my arms and legs first, Bai Ye sighed. He couldn't even handle having his bones broken, he was too delicate. Chapter 34 Mummified Corpse. Inside the gym, Bai Ye was enduring Peter's relentless beatings. From his back to his arms and thighs, the blows eventually targeted his chest and abdomen. The wounds first turned red, then bruised, and finally the flesh was torn open, bleeding profusely. Half an hour later, blood continuously oozed from Bai Ye's wounds, staining his clothes crimson, turning him into a blood-soaked figure. But even more exhausted than Bai Ye was Peter Parker. After half an hour of continuous slapping, he released the steel rod still clinging to Bai Ye's flesh and sat down on the ground. "Why did you stop?" Bai Ye asked, looking at Peter, who was now lying on the ground, puzzled. He, covered in blood, hadn't fallen yet. How could the abuser have collapsed? "Bai, I've already hit you over 10,000 times. My arms are killing me," Peter Parker said, rubbing his arms and looking at his friend with the eyes of someone looking at a monster. An ordinary person would have been turned into mincemeat by now, but this guy was holding a horse stance, not even swaying. You young man's stamina is lacking," Bai Ye complained. Despite having a 2.8 constitution, he needed a break after only half an hour. Even the donkeys in the production team wouldn't dare slack off like that. However, although dissatisfied, Bai Ye knew this was indeed Peter's physical limit. Although Peter's constitution attribute appeared to be 2.8, Bai Ye knew that constitution represented physical defense, stamina, aptitude, and recovery speed. Peter might only have reached the extreme value of 2.8 in physical defense, while the other three were far behind, unlike his panel data which showed all-around growth. "Then you should rest for a bit, we'll continue in half an hour." "I'm going to continue training," Bai Ye said helplessly. While he was speaking, Bai Ye's bleeding wounds had stopped and healed, and he would be fully recovered in 4 or 5 hours. Looking at his energetic friend, Peter could only step aside and ask, "Bai, how much longer do I have to work today? I can keep you company all day," Bai Ye said, swinging his fist forward while gripping the iron block. "Who asked you that?" Peter said speechlessly. "I asked what time you get off work tonight. It's 6 o'clock now. You can choose to go home at 10 o'clock, Bai Ye said. "Remember to come here immediately after school tomorrow." "Got it," Peter nodded helplessly. However, he had already accepted the $20,000 and couldn't refuse. He felt that there was a thick barrier made of money between him and Bai Ye. 10 minutes later, Peter had almost recovered his strength and continued to tap and pound Bai Ye all over his body. After half an hour, he would rest for 10 minutes, repeating this process. During this process, Peter also began to notice that as his exercise intensity increased, his already strong stamina and strength began to improve slightly. It seemed that the untapped potential within him was being activated through training. This discovery made Peter take it seriously and began to cooperate with Bai Ye in training. The training effect greatly increased, and by 10 o'clock at night, he didn't even want to go home. Peter, utterly exhausted, finally left the gym at 11 p.m. After he left, Bai Ye, having lost his experience pack, also stopped his training. His physique experience bar, which had just reached 1.7 that afternoon, had skyrocketed to 1.7 plus 0.2, 70%, after a night of training. And he was certain it would increase by another 0.1 tomorrow. Reflecting on the wonders of this experience pack from Spider-Man, Bai Ye retrieved paper and pen from a corner and began writing down the purple cloud divine skill he would teach Smith the next day. With his spirit attribute at 1.7, Bai Ye now possessed almost photographic memory and millimeter-level precision. Holding the pen, Bai Ye quickly traced the text without any aids, his hands leaving after images. In just 2 hours, Bai Ye had copied the entire purple cloud divine skill, along with Yu-Bu-Quin's annotations. After finishing, Bai Ye put away the manual. Feeling that his still bleeding wounds hadn't fully healed, Bai Ye simply sat cross-legged on the cold marble and began gathering his ki. An hour later, after 3 strands of purple cloud true ki appeared in Bai Ye's danshan, his wounds had completely healed. After eating some food to fill his stomach, he stood up and continued his bodybuilding exercises. He now found that he seemed to no longer need sleep. The damage caused by staying up late was starting to outpace his body's healing speed. "I seem to be becoming less and less human," Bai Ye thought silently, picking up the iron weight beside him and beginning his workout. Late at night, most people in New York City were asleep, with only a few still striving for their goals. In the hallway of a residential building in Brooklyn, a woman in her 20s lay dead at her doorstep, her eyes wide open and her body shriveled. Too late again, standing before the desiccated corpse was a man over 6 feet tall, with blue eyes, a slicked-back black hairstyle, and a muscular build, wearing a trench coat. A white skull was printed on the man's t-shirt, giving him a menacing look. The man crouched down and gently pushed the woman's head away, revealing 2 bloody holes in her neck. "Damn vampire bastards," he cursed under his breath, standing up and turning to walk into the darkness. He then pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, Matt? When are you ready for a mission?" Back in the hospital, Matt, lying back in his bed, asked hesitantly, "Victor, I probably need another 2 weeks to recover before I can walk normally again. Is there anything I can help you with?" "It's those endless vampire bastards. Although they used to be quite restless, their hunting was always regular and specific to certain locations. But this month, there have been 7 cases of drained corpses. I suspect they're up to something big." "What about Blade?" "I remember vampires have always been his domain." Matt's expression turned serious. "I tried to contact him, but he completely lost contact yesterday, which is why I came to you. How about I recommend someone to you?" "Who?" "That student who was on TV the other day. I think he has a lot of potential, and I'd like you to mentor him," Matt said. "You know I don't like mentoring newcomers, but I'll keep an eye on them." Compared to him, I admire that serial killer more." "Serial killer? Who?" "The mutant who wiped out 3 entire gangs these past 2 days. I think his actions are very much to my liking." Victor hung up the phone after saying that. The previous book club group was overwhelmed. Readers who are still interested can click the link at the end of each chapter or after the synopsis to join the new group. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35. People's physical constitutions are not the same. Late at night, in Manhattan, an ancient building constructed entirely of stone stood. Inside, a burly man with dark, glossy skin, dressed in a black trench coat and exuding power, was bound tightly with steel, his eyes filled with murderous intent as he stared at the pale-skinned man before him. "Are you all right, Blade?" The pale, bloodless man stood before Blade, surrounded by a crowd of people. "I invited you before. If you joined us and contributed 2 liters of your blood, the entire vampire race would become great again because of the blood god's descent. Unfortunately, you refused, so now you can only grovel before me like a dog." The man bent down, looking at Blade's kneeling posture, a smile spreading across his face. "Deacon, do you think mere vampires can rule this world?" Blade's face revealed a contemptuous smile. "Your so-called blood god, let him settle things with those mutants who are oppressed by humans first." "Mutants? Ha ha ha," Deacon laughed out loud. "Do you think I'm like those pure-blooded old fogies? Humans can transform into vampires, so naturally mutants can too. It's just that genetic conflicts carry a high risk of death. I've already conducted experiments and personally transformed a mutant vampire." Deacon watched Blade's expression change and became even more smug. "After I transform into the blood god, relying on my supreme bloodline, mutants will just be part of the vampire army, and humans will just be my food. Enjoy your last moments. On the night of the full moon, we will use the blood of the Daywalkers as a sacrifice to formally welcome the blood god's descent." After Deacon finished speaking, he waved his hand lightly, and his subordinate stepped forward and dragged Blade into the dungeon to be imprisoned. Strength 1.7 plus 0.2 Constitution 1.8 plus 0.2 Spirit 1.7 At dawn, the purple aura on Bai Ye's face slowly receded as he finished his practice and stood up. Stretching his arms, he could feel the immense vitality surging from his muscles and bones. The rapid improvement in constitution has led to an increased healing speed. Now, corroding the skin will not only take more time, but it will also be completely healed in just 2 hours, Bai Ye thought to himself, glancing towards the door. He could already hear footsteps outside. With a creak, Smith excitedly pushed open the door and walked in. He hadn't slept well all night, excited about being able to practice martial arts today. "You're here. That book in the corner is the Purple Cloud Divine Skill. We'll discuss the next steps after you learn it," Bai Ye said, pointing to the manual on the corner. "Is this the martial art you practice?" Bai Ye? Smith asked expectantly, walking to the corner and picking up the book in front of him. He discovered that the book, which he had expected to be antique, actually had a brand notebook label on the cover. With a strange feeling, Smith flipped through the contents. The entire book resembled a top student's notes, not only densely packed with key points in English but also featuring hand-drawn illustrations. Any person of normal intelligence should be able to understand it. Don't just stand there, hurry up and practice. If you don't understand anything, just ask me. Once you've cultivated internal energy, I'll transfer it to you directly, Bai Ye urged. Smith went to the side and began to study the manual Bai Ye had given him, trying to understand the concepts of internal energy, tension, and meridians, inwardly exclaiming that it was unscientific. Meanwhile, Bai Ye continued practicing, occasionally answering Smith's questions. Soon, in a state of one diligently teaching and the other diligently learning, it wasn't until 1 p.m. that Smith had truly grasped the basics and officially began cultivating internal energy. Then 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Just when Smith was beginning to doubt whether internal energy even existed, and whether Bai Ye was deceiving him, a trace of internal energy finally flowed through Smith's body. It's here, Bai. I can feel the internal energy the book talks about, Smith shouted excitedly. Then, the faint internal energy within him vanished with his movement. But Smith wasn't discouraged. After all, this proved that internal energy truly existed. If he meditated for another 2 hours, wouldn't it reappear? Watching Smith's excited expression, Bai Ye muttered with a strange look, "It really can be cultivated." Smith, puzzled, asked, "Bai, what did you say?" "Nothing. Your movement just now caused the internal energy to break." "Practice diligently for another 2 hours, Bai Ye said. "No problem," Smith replied enthusiastically. The most important thing was the process of going from 0 to 1. After Smith sat down again, Bai Ye shook his head slightly, somewhat doubtfully. Actually, he had some doubts about whether Smith could cultivate internal energy. After all, the worlds were different, and the physiques were naturally different. People in Jin Yuang's martial arts world definitely didn't have mutant genes, and people in Marvel shouldn't normally have internal energy meridians. The diversity of human bodies across different worlds has led to an infinite number of cultivation systems: mutant genes, chakra, internal energy, acupoints, domineering aura, microcosm, limiters, gene locks, God's forbidden zones, magnetic field rotation, and human tamers. If each system could communicate with the others, imagine the sheer number of systems mixed together within the human body. Wouldn't it lead to an explosion? The cultivation methods in each world are different, even completely contradictory. How could they possibly be compatible? If meridians truly existed in the real world, they would have been discovered through dissection long ago, not waiting for Bai Ye to flaunt his purple cloud divine skill. Bai Ye's ability to cultivate might be due to his status as a chat group member and his infinitely strengthening physique, but why is Smith also able to cultivate? He couldn't understand. With this question in mind, Bai Ye glanced back at Smith, who was still grinning foolishly, silently keeping it to himself and not delving deeper. This wasn't a question he should be considering at his current strength level of 1.9. Since pondering was bound to yield no answer, Bai Ye stopped dwelling on the question and focused on his training. Not long after school, Peter also came to the gym. Seeing Smith sitting cross-legged in the corner, diligently practicing, he asked with some confusion, "Bai, who's this, him?" "He's my fitness instructor. He's practicing martial arts now." "Do you want to learn?" Bai asked. He was planning to sell it anyway, and the purple cloud divine skill had a low ceiling and slow effects, posing no threat to him. As long as it wasn't widely disseminated, there was no point in keeping it a secret. Martial arts? Like in the movies. You could think of it that way. You can learn it when you rest. It won't do your health any harm, Bai Ye said, gently putting down the iron block in his hand and looking towards the door. Behind the door, someone was secretly lurking, having been there a minute ago, acting suspiciously. Chapter 36 is only 1 point stronger than you. "Hey, you eavesdropper hiding by the door, come in and talk," Bai Ye gently twisted his arm and said calmly. As he spoke, Peter also looked towards the door. After focusing his attention, Peter heard a heartbeat coming from the doorway, surprised that the guy had been hiding behind it. Daredevil was right, you do have potential, a deep male voice came from the doorway, and then the door was pushed open. A man with a skull printed on his t-shirt walked in, looking at Bai Ye with admiration. "Daredevil? You're the one who brought him here. Bai Ye frowned and said, I just want to live a peaceful life now. Why are you superheroes always haunting me? Can you get lost? Thinking of Daredevil, whose limbs he had broken but who still attracted so many women, Bai Ye wanted to go to the hospital and punch him a couple more times. Was he just looking for trouble? He's a superhero? And you know Daredevil? Peter looked at the man in front of him curiously. This was the first time he had ever seen a superhero. Of course, let me formally introduce you. This is the Punisher, a native New York street hero like Daredevil, the city's crime fighter. The only downside is that he's been in this business for 4 or 5 years now, and Kingpin is still making waves in the underworld. I wonder what he's been doing all these years fighting crime. Bai Ye solemnly introduced the Punisher to Peter. As the Punisher's face gradually darkened, Bai Ye suddenly realized that Peter, the Spider-Man, might end up like this too. Kid, don't you think you're being a bit arrogant? The Punisher walked up to Bai Ye, the 1.9-meter tall Punisher slightly bowing his head to look down at Bai Ye, who was half a head shorter than him. With great power comes great responsibility. A peaceful life is something you have to fight for. If you don't eliminate evil, no one can have peace. Here we go again. Is this all the talk you superheroes have? Bai Ye rolled his eyes. After becoming an orphan 3 years ago, I stopped believing your motivational rhetoric. I'm too lazy to argue with you. If you have something to say it, otherwise, get lost. Before we get down to business, I need to assess you. If your strength isn't up to par, then, the Punisher's expression changed instantly as Bai Ye's right fist tore through the air towards his abdomen, striking much faster than his own. You're talking nonsense. Bai Ye's lips trembled, but before he could finish his sentence, his right fist struck the Punisher's crossed arms in a blocking motion. A tyrannical force pierced through the Punisher's tense body, instantly launching him into the air. How could it be so fast? Surprise, or rather shock, appeared in the Punisher's eyes. But before his soaring body reached its highest point, Bai Ye's right fist had already transformed into a palm. His right palm gently covered the Punisher's head, then pulled his head and slammed him hard to the ground. The whole process took less than a second, and Bai Ye had already pinned this superhero, whose fighting power was no less than Daredevil's, to the ground. Only then did Bai Ye slowly utter the second half of his sentence. Too much? How is this possible? Did Matt say that this kid's strength was only slightly stronger than mine, that he had no technique whatsoever, and that he could be defeated as long as he was careful? The Punisher, pinned to the ground, felt a shiver run down his spine, utterly shocked. Matt, you idiot, you gave me false information, and you call him only slightly stronger than me? At this moment, the Punisher didn't know that Matt was actually exaggerating a bit. Bai Ye's strength wasn't by much more than a fraction of a point, but only a mere 0.5, calculated using the attribute panels method. Description: attack detected. Analyzing opponent's data. Name: Frank Castle. Strength: 1.4, agility. 1.4, constitution. 1.4, spirit. 1.4, charisma. 1.1. Bai Ye silently observed the Punisher's stats panel. Numerically, there wasn't a significant difference between him and Daredevil. Both were battle-hardened human warriors at their limits. Yet, in just 5 days, he had gone from needing a surprise attack to a one-hit annihilation. Now, against these street superheroes, even a mere 0.5 average stat difference isn't something that can be overcome by sheer numbers. I wouldn't be afraid even if there were 10,000 of them, Bai Ye thought. Composing himself, Bai Ye looked at the lying Punisher, withdrew his right palm, and gently tapped the opponent's head with only his smooth, white jade-like index finger. The Punisher, sprawled on the ground, strained to get up, but felt as if an iron rod was firmly pressing down on his head, preventing him from lifting it. Forcing his way up would only result in his fragile skull being pierced by Bai Ye's fingers first. Facing the Punisher's mortal body, Bai Ye, whose physical abilities far surpassed his, could render him immobile with a mere touch of his index finger. Bai Ye calmly looked down at the Punisher, who was a full size taller than him, and slowly said, "Now can you tell me what brings you here, Bai? Why don't you let him go first?" Peter pleaded from the side. Then, looking down at the previously arrogant superhero, now seemingly unable to move like a turtle pinned to its shell, Peter's illusions about superheroes shattered. So superheroes aren't that strong after all. If I were to take Bai's place, he'd probably be down even faster, Peter thought. Looking at the other's current state, Bai Ye thought about it and agreed. These superheroes, though vastly different in strength, were all incredibly tough and wouldn't utter a word. The more they were threatened, the more excited they'd become. They couldn't be rewarded. The Punisher easily released his grip, quickly pushing himself up from the ground. He glanced at Bai Ye with surprise and explained his purpose. The vampires in New York have been very active lately. This month alone, 7 blood-drained corpses have been discovered. I suspect they're up to something big. I originally wanted to find Mark, but he recommended you to me due to health reasons. Now it's proven that your strength far surpasses mine, so I'd like to invite you to join me in investigating the reasons behind this, the Punisher said. The Punisher's long speech, in Bai Ye's eyes, was simply, the Punisher has sent you a side quest request, Vampire Riot. Except, I refuse, Bai Ye said without hesitation, then pointed his right hand towards the door, saying, you can leave now. Chapter 37 Entrepreneurial Mindset. Seeing the Punisher's request to team up, Bai Ye refused without hesitation. Fighting some armed bank robbers would be fine. With his current physique, he'd need to be shot 7 or 8 times in the same spot in the head to die. Doing good deeds when there's no danger might occasionally interest Bai Ye, a way to relax. But vampires, that sounds supernatural and seems incredibly troublesome. Whoever wants to do it can do it. His current strength doesn't support him inflating his ego to that extent. Faced with Bai Ye's dismissal, the Punisher didn't continue his verbal sparring and left without hesitation. The earlier crushing defeat was humiliating enough. There was no need to continue the entanglement. But before leaving, Bai Ye called him back. By the way, I remember Blade was handling the vampire stuff, wasn't he? How did you, an ordinary person, get involved? Isn't that a bit over the top? Bai Ye asked curiously, asking the same question as Matt. Blade lost contact the day before yesterday. It seems he's been killed. The Punisher said this and left, leaving Bai Ye deep in thought. Do vampires really exist? Peter Parker felt his worldview crumbling. Had so many things been hidden behind this peaceful facade? We've seen mutants, and we can't accept vampires? They're just a bunch of shady characters. In terms of strength, 99% of them couldn't beat you now that you've mutated, Bai Ye said, lost in thought. He hadn't expected to stumble upon a Blade storyline while sitting at home. But according to the original plot, no matter which movie it is, even without me, I can handle it independently, right? Bai Ye thought uncertainly. After all, the universe he was in now was definitely not the original Earth 199,999 Avengers universe, but a strange world in the Marvel multiverse, a strange mix of multiple independent worldviews. Vampires, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and mutants all living and thriving in one world. It was impossible to predict what would happen due to the butterfly effect. Filled with inexplicable anxiety about his own strength, Bai Ye picked up the steel rod lying on the ground and threw it at Peter. Just like yesterday, use him to hit me, but increase the force by 20% while keeping the frequency the same, 20%. Peter looked at Bai Ye in surprise, but still nodded heavily, increasing the force of his whip as instructed. Soon, the dull thud of steel bars hitting rubber tires echoed throughout the gym. The low sound could even be faintly heard by the other gym-goers below, who looked up at the ceiling with puzzled expressions, thinking there was construction going on up there. Because of the increased force, Peter's whipping lasted much shorter this time, requiring him to stop and relax his hands after only 25 minutes. However, compared to physical fatigue, Bai Ye was more concerned about Peter Parker's current mental state. Since just now, why have you been so absent-minded? Bai Ye asked Peter, who was deep in thought. I was thinking about what the Punisher said earlier. Peter paused for a moment, then stopped what he was doing. You said that after we have these abilities, should we use them to become superheroes like them, to help more people? Faced with his question, Bai Ye didn't speak, but turned and stared at him for a long time without saying a word. That gaze made Peter a little uneasy, wondering if his friend was angry. For a moment, the atmosphere in the gym became somewhat quiet. After a long while, Bai Ye slowly looked away and continued exercising, urging, "What are you standing there for? Don't stop moving your hands." Phew, Peter breathed a sigh of relief and continued swinging his steel rod. I have to say, he truly is a good guy who, even when he turns evil, only threatens his boss for a raise. Even now that Uncle Ben isn't dead, he's still preparing to walk the old path of a superhero. Bai Ye was a little annoyed, wondering if he was paying Peter Parker too much for his part-time job, causing Peter Parker, without the pressure of survival, to start pursuing spiritual wealth. and of all things, becoming a superhero. Of course, Bai Ye also knew that this guy's persona was that of a born saint, impossible to persuade and impossible to change. He could only silently wish him a smooth and lonely journey. However, the day before yesterday, I asked Smith to go to the factory to buy and modify the stamping machine. Even if it costs money to save on license and other procedures, it will still take at least 10 days to half a month. I can't waste this window of opportunity. At the very least, I have to squeeze out the remaining value from Peter, Bai Ye thought to himself, then suddenly looked at Peter and said, Peter, if you insist on becoming a superhero, I won't stop you. But have you thought about how to balance your hobby and your life? Being a superhero doesn't come with any subsidies or guarantees. I remember you were raised by your uncle and aunt. Don't you think about them? Peter immediately fell into deep hesitation. Thinking of the look of relief on his uncle and aunt's faces when he took out 20,000 yuan in cash this morning and told them about his part-time job, his previously restless heart immediately cooled down. Don't forget, I've already paid you a high salary of 20,000 for a month's part-time job. I won't stop you from becoming a superhero, but at least the first month's work can't be delayed, Bai Ye said. I understand, Peter thought for a moment and then nodded solemnly. Plan works. Seeing Peter agree, Bai Ye thought with satisfaction. Sure enough, the real-world Palu is still too unstable. As the boss, he actually has to take care of the employees' emotions, which is truly the opposite of heavenly order. Unlike the ordered machines, which are hardworking and won't stop as long as the internal parts don't break down. After half a month, when the factory's modern equipment is developed, they can directly optimize Peter's backward manual labor. Of course, this is not a layoff, but a way to send highly skilled personnel to the outside world. It's about sending Peter, this highly skilled laborer, to the streets of New York to continue being his superhero, contributing to the construction of American capitalism and shining brightly. At this moment, Peter didn't know that Bai Ye beside him had already thought of what would happen after optimizing him, while he was still unknowingly working hard to train Bai Ye. Even Peter felt grateful, thinking that he had already expressed his intention to leave, yet the other party was still so considerate of him. His friend was truly wonderful. There's still not enough time, Bai Ye thought regretfully. From the moment he obtained the panel until now, various events had been attracting him like a magnet, impossible to avoid. It was all happening too fast. Chapter 38 Encountering a Ghost. Only 7 or 8 days had passed since Bai Ye obtained the panel, but time seemed to be running at breakneck speed. One thing after another jumped into his life, leaving him no way to escape. During each training session, Bai Ye pondered how to improve his training and how to better develop in the future. However, time constraints prevented him from doing many things. Ultimately, it was because his growth period was too short. He was too weak now, not even having passed his developmental stage. Take the stamping press, for example. Did he not know that this thing would be of immense benefit to his training? But whether it was waiting for the approval documents or finding a specialist to modify it, it wouldn't be something that could be done in a short time. Moreover, once he got this set, the cost of purchasing and modifying it would deplete most of his money, leaving him short of living expenses. There were ways to make money, but going through the proper channels was either troublesome or time-consuming. If just getting a stamping press was this difficult, then better training equipment, such as voltage converters, mustard gas, or even directly attempting to swallow a nuclear reactor, all these training methods required financial support. Making money is simple, just sell the Xixia divine skill. Given its characteristic of only losing about 20% when transferring power directly, let those with capital and companies handle it. With enough people, creating martial arts masters overnight is no problem. That's a huge market value. The problem is, with Bai Ye's current strength, he can't even beat Spider-Man. How can he dare flaunt his wealth? Who can he trust in Marvel? Tony Stark, before becoming Iron Man, is trustworthy, but as a key target of HIELD, Crossbones might be knocking on his door that very night. In this world with mutants as its foundation, who knows how many monstrous machines Hydra might unleash? This is why Bai Ye is currently keeping a low profile, at least until his 3D data reaches Spider-Man's level. He dares not negotiate with those people, otherwise he has no confidence whatsoever. If Bai Ye were rich now, he wouldn't stop Peter from leaving, and might even give him millions as a parting gift to win him over, replicating the "those who betray me get millions" motivational rhetoric. Unfortunately, ideals are often far removed from reality. Bai I've successfully stored a wisp of true energy in my danshan, as instructed in the manual, but it's too weak. Smith, who had been sitting silently in the corner, spoke up while Bai Ye was training. Bai Ye glanced at him, and the bloodied man put down the iron heap and nodded. Okay, turn your back to me now. I'll transfer a wisp of true energy to you to test it out. As a future advertisement for negotiating with a gym owner, Bai Ye planned to give Smith a 10-day experience bonus upon login, and also let him experience the effects of this so-called transfer of energy from the gentleman swordsman. Bai Ye, you're going to transfer energy to me? Smith's eyes widened. Having thoroughly studied Bai Ye's handwritten notes, he knew exactly what transfer of energy meant. Stop talking nonsense, turn around, I'll transfer my internal energy to you, Bai Ye said calmly. A mere wisp of true energy, which would take Smith a whole day, would only take him 10 minutes. Soon, as Smith excitedly sat cross-legged, Bai Ye directly behind him, slowly transferring his internal energy into Smith's meridians through his clothes. With a purple cloud true energy entering his body, Smith immediately held his breath and began to circulate his internal energy according to the technique. In 3 minutes, Bai Ye's internal energy was completely converted, leaving only 8 strands, and Bai Ye completely lost this wisp of original internal energy. Is this what transferring internal energy is? Bai Ye closed his eyes, sensing the missing internal energy in his danshan. The whole process was nothing special, even quite ordinary. Peter, watching with interest, asked, Bai, can I learn this internal energy technique too? Sure, but you can't pass it on to anyone this year. After that, it's up to you, Bai Ye reminded him, to ensure the scarcity of internal energy. Soon, Peter began helping Bai Ye exercise while simultaneously reviewing the notes Bai Ye had given him during breaks. As a genius whose mental strength had reached 1.6 even before his mutation, he quickly memorized the entire manual, preparing to try it out at home. Out of gratitude to Bai Ye, Peter helped him cultivate until 11 p.m. before leaving. After everyone left, as night fell over New York, Bai Ye, as usual, dragged out sulfuric acid and began washing away the traces on his body. Then, under the cover of darkness, he began infiltrating the homes of the gangsters to carry out his cleanup work, based on his memory. Now, all of New York was on edge due to the massacre of 3 gangs. Everyone was on high alert. This time, Bai Ye went directly to the houses, only to find them empty, encountering only a few armed guards specifically left inside. After this disappointment, with the spirit of since I'm already here, Bai Ye visited another location, only to find it was also a trap. Clearly, these gangsters had learned their lesson. Facing the darkness, Bai Ye walked along a deserted, remote path towards the gym. A cool breeze blew along the way, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. Most of the streetlights, worn and dim from age, cast a yellowish glow that shone on Bai Ye's face, which had mostly healed from the acid poisoning, making it seem as if he had stumbled onto the set of a horror movie. Rustle, rustle, Bai Ye could hear the constant rustling of insects and geckos crawling among the grass and trees. Suddenly, Bai Ye's expression froze as he caught a faint, lingering scent of blood in the air. Having killed many people in recent days, he could clearly detect the vitality in the blood. It was definitely fresh blood that had just flowed and hadn't yet congealed. Has someone just been murdered around here? Bai Ye wondered. Of course, he wasn't particularly alarmed. After all, the number of people he had killed, directly and indirectly, was almost 100, just a minor murder case. Because he couldn't hear a heartbeat nearby, Bai Ye guessed the murderer had left. Just as he was about to go forward to check, a sound suddenly came from his side. Crack, a sound like a rotten branch breaking came from the bushes, making Bai Ye turn his head and shout, "Who's there? What kind of monster are you?" A tall, cold-faced woman emerged from the bushes, looking at Bai Ye's acrid face with fear. She had originally intended to ambush and kill Bai Ye, but after seeing his face, her legs went weak with fright. Where did this monster come from, looking so terrifying? Looking at the fearful, cold-faced woman before him, Bai Ye's eyelids twitched slightly. Part of the bloody smell came from the woman's mouth. It really is a ghost, Bai Ye and the cold-faced woman thought simultaneously as they stared at each other. Chapter 39 Innate Working Saint Body. On a secluded path, 2 beings, neither human nor human, met face to face. One was physiologically distinct from humans, while the other was terrifyingly inhuman in appearance. It seems like you always run into ghosts when you walk the night too often, Bai Ye sized up the woman before him. No heartbeat, a constant stench of blood emanating from her mouth. Recalling his recent conversation with the Punisher, the woman's identity was now obvious. So this is a vampire, Bai Ye wondered, crouching slightly, his left hand in front of him, his right hand on his lower back, his gaze fixed on the woman, ready to fight or flee at any moment. You must be human. I've never seen anyone this ugly before. No wonder you took a back path to avoid frightening others. The woman looked at Bai Ye with disgust. He was truly ugly, even frightening her. Behind her lay a female corpse, drained of blood. Since his prey had been seen, he might as well kill her. Someone this ugly didn't even have the desire to drink blood. A murderous glint flashed in the woman's eyes, her slender hands forming claws as she lunged at Bai Ye. At her current superhuman speed, she could tear Bai Ye's throat off in the blink of an eye. But the next moment, Bai Ye's right hand, resting on his lower back, shot forward, gripping a Glock automatic pistol. The dark muzzle was steadily aimed at the woman, and without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 In the remote suburbs, a series of crisp gunshots startled a flock of birds. 5 bullets struck the woman's vulnerable throat in quick succession, embedding themselves deeply into the bone. Bai Ye was using American traditional martial arts, Aikido. The entire process took less than a second, completed before the woman could even get close. As for where the automatic pistol came from, after wiping out so many gangs, it makes perfect sense to just grab one. The bullets from the pistol could travel at least 200 meters per second, a distance Bai Ye couldn't even match. The reason Bai Ye could dodge bullets against gangsters was because his dodging speed exceeded the time it took them to aim and pull the trigger. But now that it was Bai Ye's turn to fire, things were different. He wasn't an ordinary person. When both of their physical abilities exceeded human limits, and given Bai Ye's current firing speed, the woman absolutely couldn't see it. Unless the woman's dodging speed could actually dodge the bullet after firing, she would be riddled with bullets. The woman clutched her throat, staring incredulously at the fully automatic pistol in Bai Ye's hand, as if accusing him of lacking martial ethics. Description: you have detected an attack on another person. Collecting opponent data. Name: Carrie Camilla. Strength 1.9, agility 1.7, constitution 4.3, spirit 1.6, charisma 1.3. Her base attributes are lower than mine, so she should be able to escape, but this 4.3 constitution. Bai Ye looked at the female vampire's throat, easily pierced by a bullet. Her defense was even weaker than his own. So, this attribute is based on the other person's healing ability. Bai Ye's expression turned serious. He sheathed his fully automatic pistol, which he had been preparing to fire continuously, and stared intently at the vampire in front of him. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the bullet in the woman's throat was visibly squeezed out by the healing flesh and fell onto the ground. Seeing that she had returned to normal, Bai Ye humbly asked, "Hello, I'd like to ask you a question. Are you vampires not only immortal, but also have inexhaustible stamina and never get tired?" "Of course. How could you fragile humans understand the greatness of the vampire race?" "As long as you have enough blood," the woman said proudly, but halfway through her sentence, she was stunned to find that the look in the eyes of the repulsive man in front of her had changed. That look was like a capitalist seeing a naturally gifted worker, impossible to hide. "Excellent, excellent. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. You are exactly the talent I need." Bai Ye's voice grew louder as he approached, ringing in the vampire's ears. Before her eyes, wide with shock, could react, an arm as hard as cast iron gripped her forehead. So fast, before the woman could even process this thought, she was pulled along by an overwhelming force. Her head slammed against the tree behind her. Boom! Under Bai Ye's pressure, the woman's head was as if pressed against a hydraulic press. Her skull instantly deformed, and blood gushed from her orifices. The sturdy tree behind her was imprinted with the shape of the vampire's head, the trunk trembling violently, causing leaves to fall in droves. Pain. Intense pain. A wave of intense agony washed over her. The next moment, a pair of slightly warm right hands gently touched the vampire's soft, white abdomen, then gradually increased the pressure. Ah! In the deserted, secluded thicket, the vampire screamed in agony as she felt her abdomen being slowly ripped open by a blunt instrument. Then, her vision, previously obscured by the man, returned. Looking down, she saw his right hand, shaped like a chopstick, plunged into her abdomen, pinning her to the tree like a coffin nail. Blood oozed from the wound. "Since you've already killed someone, I won't talk to you about humanity. Now you only have two choices. Bai Ye's right hand plunged into her abdomen, feeling the slippery texture of her cold intestines. His left hand grabbed her fist as she lunged forward, squeezing it lightly. With a scream of agony, her wrist was instantly crushed. First, become my dog. You'll do whatever I say, without suffering for nothing. Second, be tortured by me before becoming my dog. That way, you'll seem more resilient. As Bai Ye spoke, the vampire's deformed skull and abdominal wounds began to heal. Soon, the wound on her contracting abdomen began to heal, enveloping Bai Ye's fingers, making him think to himself, no wonder she's a vampire. Don't even think about it. The vampire opened her fanged mouth, preparing to bite the man before her. But the next moment, Bai Ye's fist slammed into her face, knocking out all her teeth, which she swallowed. Don't worry, you'll agree. Bai Ye glanced at the moonlight above. It was the middle of the night, and there was no one for miles around, the perfect location for torture. Let me tell you, don't overestimate your will, and don't overestimate the enemy's limits. I'm not a good person. Next, I'll use 10 times the ruthlessness I used in my training on you, until you can't take it anymore and start begging for mercy. A slight smile played on Bai Ye's lips as he looked at the seemingly indestructible woman before him. His right hand, which had stopped moving, thrust again, piercing her abdomen completely. Chapter 40. You smell so good. Late at night, Bai Ye carried a blood-stained body on his shoulder towards the club. It must be said, this female vampire's willpower was remarkable. She had actually endured his torture for a full 2 minutes. Exhausted, the female vampire slumped against Bai Ye's shoulder. Although her wounds had healed, lingering phantom pain still emanated from her. The woman glared resentfully at the ugly man carrying her, already contemplating her fate in his clutches. She was aware of her own appearance. She wasn't the kind of ghost who was beautiful but unaware of it. And she was even more terrified of Bai Ye's appearance, a face that could frighten even vampires. Recalling the horrific torture methods she had just witnessed, the young woman reasonably deduced that this perverted man was definitely one of those whose ugliness had twisted his psyche since childhood. The vampire recalled the Western fantasy works he had read, a beautiful woman falling into a goblin's lair. The consequences were predictable. The two remained silent the entire way, with no need for conversation, and returned to the club in quiet, uneventful silence. Back on the second floor, Bai Ye put the woman down and said, "Go take a shower now, wash off the blood, and then come back to report to me. Don't try to escape. I can hear everything you do." Bai Ye looked at the woman threateningly and said, "If I catch you this time, no matter how much you beg for mercy, I will torture you until dawn." With that, Bai Ye tossed her a set of loose-fitting clothes he wore for training and then ignored her. He found a bathroom stall and washed off the vampire blood. After a quick rinse, Bai Ye stepped out and saw the woman emerging from the bathroom wearing his clothes. The girl's curvaceous figure, draped in Bai Ye's somewhat loose coat, revealed glimpses of her voluptuous body. Bai Ye's expression remained unchanged, but he paused for a moment when he saw her vampire-like face. Because she noticed that the ugly man in front of her, who had a great physique, had almost completely lost the terrifying scars on his face, and his hair, which used to be buzz-cut, had grown almost twice as long. "Don't just stand there, I don't support lazy bums." Bai Ye gestured for the other to follow him, then walked into the private gym and pointed to a blood-stained steel rod in the corner, saying, "Now, use 60% of your strength to hit me with this." "Huh?" The vampire stared blankly at Bai Ye, wondering if he was crazy, that such a good thing was possible. "What huh? If you don't attack me, then I'll attack you." Bai Ye watched as the other picked up the rod and stared at his head eagerly, then picked up a 2-ton iron block and reminded him, "You can only attack my back, arms, and thighs. If you dare hit my head even once, your head will be crushed by this iron block in my hand the next second." "Got it," the vampire replied sullenly, glanced at Bai Ye's face, which was beginning to take on a human form, and picked up the steel rod, striking Bai Ye's back with 70% of his strength. Anyway, might as well beat him up. Beating this ugly monster would be cathartic. Before this, the vampire had no idea where this guy's monstrous physique came from. But after an hour of continuous beating, despite being bruised and battered, his complexion remained unchanged, and she seemed to understand. Especially as time went on, Bai Ye's appearance began to return to normal, and his image in the vampire's eyes began to change. Initially, he was an evil and terrifying non-human creature in the vampire's eyes, then he became an ugly, psychologically twisted goblin. After his bath, Bai Ye evolved into a troll goblin with a decent physique. Half an hour later, after recovering considerably, Bai Ye became an incredibly hateful but determined human brat. Until just now, with Bai Ye fully recovered and his charm restored to 1.4, he transformed into my evil and domineering human master. Although still unwilling, if Bai Ye wanted to have sex with her now, it seemed not so hard to accept. Are you a mutant? Why do you heal so quickly? And where did those scars on your face come from? Looking at Bai Ye's current appearance, the female vampire felt a surge of curiosity and began asking questions. Too much nonsense. If you want to live, do your job properly and stop asking so many questions, Bai Ye said impatiently. The stick that had been striking him stopped a moment later. What are you doing? Bai Ye turned back to the vampire impatiently. If you don't give me a good reason now, you'll be screaming in agony. I'm out of strength, the vampire said, sitting on the ground. Didn't you say you had unlimited stamina? Bai Ye frowned. That was when there was blood. After being tortured by you for so long, plus the training I've been doing, I've already exhausted all the blood I've absorbed. The vampire looked at the blood flowing freely from Bai Ye's body, dripping from the whipping, and licked his lips with his bright red tongue. Simply put, I need to drink blood. From the moment he saw the blood flowing from Bai Ye's body, he felt a strange attraction to it. This feeling was unlike anything she'd ever experienced before, like some kind of powerful tonic. However, before this, because she'd only been drinking the blood of fresh virgins, and Bai Ye was so ugly, it made her feel nauseous, so she'd suppressed her urges. Now that she'd regained her appearance, she decided to slightly push her boundaries. What a hassle. You want to drink blood, huh? Bai Ye clicked his tongue helplessly. Since vampires could choose whether to transform their victims into vampires, he wanted to avoid actually transforming himself while drinking blood. That would be ridiculous. So he took out the bowl he'd been using for meals from the corner, placed his right thumb directly on the carotid artery in his left arm, and jabbed it in with all his might. Soon, a steady stream of blood flowed from the artery, spilling into the bowl. To prevent the blood from stopping, Bai Ye's fingers constantly moved the carotid artery, preventing it from healing too quickly. Soon, with a bowl full of blood, Bai Ye released his thumb. She handed over the bright red, even fragrant blood, saying, "Here, the blood you wanted." The vampire practically snatched the blood from Bai Ye's hand, bringing it to her lips and taking a large gulp. The next moment, a rich energy was released from the fragrant blood. The energy contained in just this small sip was equivalent to the entire blood of the woman she had previously absorbed, and the taste was ridiculously good for a vampire. She practically gulped down all the blood in the bowl, and after licking the bowl clean, she was almost addicted, her somewhat dazed gaze fixed on Bai Ye's blood-stained skin, wishing she could stick out her tongue and lick it from top to bottom. Chapter 41 Propelled by Electricity. 10 days. Looking at the female vampire's gaze, which seemed to want to devour him from head to toe, Bai Ye felt a sense of doubt. Is it really that delicious? Bai Ye wondered, looking at his fair and supple right hand. After a moment's hesitation, he took a bite, much to the female vampire's surprise. Savoring the rich, bloody taste in his mouth, Bai Ye slightly clicked his tongue. Bai Ye truly couldn't understand how the other woman could be so excited about drinking his blood. But, why do I feel a little full? Bai Ye subconsciously clutched his stomach, his mind filled with a strange sense of satiety. This wasn't because he couldn't eat anymore, but rather a signal from his body that he had consumed enough energy. Bai Ye glanced strangely at the bite mark on his arm. So now I don't need to consume any other food, can I just eat myself and live forever? That's a bit ridiculous. Bai Ye glanced at the stunned woman beside him. He felt that, aside from his self-healing abilities, he was more like a vampire than her. No, I should be considered a weakened version of Agni, Bai Ye silently pondered, then kicked the female vampire beside him, saying, "Hey, stop standing around, get to work after you've eaten. Let's work overtime all night, okay? And my name is Carrie Camilla." Camilla introduced herself, then spent the entire night foraging and drinking Bai Ye's blood. The next morning, when Smith arrived, he found Bai Ye's private gym on the second floor completely covered by curtains, making it dark. A woman with a cold and aloof appearance was currently beating Bai Ye with a steel rod, prompting him to ask curiously, "Bai, who is this?" "I hired a mutant with exceptional physical abilities, named Camilla. She'll be taking over your training duties from now on," Bai Ye said, noticing the box in Smith's hand. "This is the generator I had you modify the day before yesterday." Hearing Bai Ye's question, Smith, who had been surprised and scrutinizing his colleague, confidently introduced a box. Of course, this is a specially modified small generator. It can directly adjust the magnetic field's strength to change the output voltage and current. Smith put down the generator, pulled out several wires, and handed them out, saying, "Attach these sensor patches to various parts of your skin, turn the button, and it will supply power. The voltage can reach up to 5,000 volts. Okay, let's start with 110 V. Bai Ye squatted down and attached the sensor patches to various parts of his upper body. The next moment, as Smith turned the button, current flowed through the sensor patches, spreading throughout Bai Ye's body. The electric current caused Bai Ye's muscles to twitch unconsciously, but his physique far surpassed that of ordinary people. After a short while, Bai Ye quickly adapted and returned to normal, continuing to instruct, "Increase the voltage. This time, turn it to 220 V. After repeated attempts, Bai Ye finally stopped Smith from increasing the voltage further, only after adjusting it to 500 volts. The description read, "You are using 500 volts to continuously stimulate and damage your body's cells. Repeating for 20 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds increases your strength cap by 0.1. Repeating for 14 hours, 31 minutes, and 45 seconds increases your constitution cap by 0.1. Repeating for 24 hours, 23 minutes, and 19 seconds increases your mental cap by 0.1, looking at the effects displayed on the description. Bai Ye smiled with satisfaction. This was now truly a dual cultivation of internal and external strength. Now, he was using an iron weight to train his strength, his cells were being propelled by the electric current, and his skin was receiving a double beating from both vampires and Spider-Man. With so many buffs, it would be truly unfair if he couldn't reach Peter Parker's level within a month. After casually instructing Camilla, who was watching the scene, to wrap the end of the steel rod with rubber, Bai Ye gently clenched his fist and made up his mind. Now that all the training equipment is complete, the entire gym is my current paradise. I won't step out of the gym until all my attributes are pushed to 2.5. With this goal in mind, Bai Ye picked up the iron rod and began to train, deciding to resolutely implement his seclusion strategy for the next few days. No sleep. No rest. No enjoyment. During the day, Bai Ye had Camilla train him with a steel rod. At night, he let Camilla sleep and Peter Parker took over. As for the weekend, the two of them would do mixed doubles training. Because he discovered through Camilla that his flesh and blood were a rare treasure, Bai Ye drank blood with Camilla when he was thirsty and ate meat to satisfy his hunger when he was hungry. As for being tired, he would sit down and cultivate the purple cloud true key within his body for a while. During his long period of seclusion, Bai Ye could feel the tremendous changes in his body every day through the instructions. At the end of the first day, Camilla watched in astonishment as the weight of the iron lump in Bai Ye's hand doubled, reaching 3 tons. At the end of the 5th day, under Smith's envious gaze, the sky above Bai Ye's head resembled a surging purple sea, having refined a year's worth of internal energy in less than 6 hours. By the 8th day, with a crisp clang, Peter stared blankly as the steel rod he had struck Bai Ye's back snapped in two and fell to the ground. In the midst of his brutal seclusion, 10 days passed quietly. Bai Ye sat cross-legged on the ground, slowly breathing in and out his true energy, the purple aura above his head so dense it seemed to liquefy and drip onto the ground. Although he spent most of his time training, in his spare moments of meditation, his danshan was already filled with 70 years' worth of purple cloud true energy. Slowly guiding the true energy flowing through his meridians into his danshan, Bai Ye exhaled a long breath and slowly stood up. He gently clenched his fist. The feeling was completely different from 10 days ago. As he pondered, the small generator beside him had already turned its power to maximum, continuously channeling 5,000 volts of electricity into Bai Ye's body, burning his flesh and blood before rapidly recovering. Going to train again, Camilla walked up helplessly beside him, looking at the handsome man with hair falling to his shoulders. Bai Ye gently shook his head and said, "I'm a little tired." "Tired?" Camilla said matter-of-factly. "Which day haven't you been tired these days?" "Not physically tired, but mentally a bit weary. I need to relax." As Bai Ye spoke, he looked at Camilla and asked without any shyness, "Want to make love with me, huh?" Camilla was stunned. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Threat? Just a warning. I said, do you want to have sex with me? Bai Ye's gaze was fixed on Camilla. Camilla was completely stunned, not expecting Bai Ye to say something so direct. For the 10 days she had been locked up with Bai Ye, eating and sleeping together every day, she had initially planned to escape while he slept. But after a few days, she despaired. Laughable, this guy didn't need to sleep at all, while she, a vampire, couldn't even manage a short nap. This Iron Man was still training. Finally, after 5 days, seeing Bai Ye's physique grow stronger day by day, she began to give up the idea of escaping. Especially as time went on, and the blood flowing from Bai Ye's body became increasingly fragrant to vampires, coupled with Bai Ye's flawless face, she would occasionally have the thought of pushing him down. But even if she had the thought, there was nothing she could do if Bai Ye didn't agree. After 10 days, Bai Ye's image in her eyes had completely transformed into training fanatic, the kind without any sexual desire. She even regretted wasting such a handsome face, it was such a waste. But now, Bai Ye, contrary to his usual behavior, invited her to taste the forbidden fruit? Had he been possessed? At this moment, in the gym at night, Bai Ye's extremely aggressive gaze began to move down Camilla's beautiful face. The undulating peaks, the wide valleys, the stagnant streams. Stared at like that, Camilla subconsciously took 2 steps back, her hands covering Bai Ye's face, her face flushed with embarrassment. You? What's wrong with you? I can tell you're still a virgin, but if you don't want to, then forget it. Bai Ye turned away indifferently. 10 days and 10 nights of mental tension had left him somewhat mentally exhausted, and the sight of exercise made him irritable. Now he just wanted to relax, and he wasn't particular about what kind of relaxation it was. He walked to a corner, took out his clothes and put them on, then took out his phone, turned it on, ignored the large number of missed calls from recently, thought for a moment, and dialed a number. Hello, Gwen? It's me. Bai Ye spoke into the phone in front of Camilla. Hearing Bai Ye's voice, the girl, who had been lounging lazily on her soft bed, immediately perked up and sat up. Bai Ye. Why are you calling me all of a sudden? Gwen's voice, barely containing her joy, came through the phone. Ugh, I've been working a little too hard lately and want to relax, so I was asking if you had any recommendations for fun places, Bai Ye said. Hearing Bai Ye ask her to recommend places to go, such an obvious date signal, Gwen smiled and said, are you going to invite me out? How about we go to the movies? There's a good movie coming out right now. Camilla, on the other hand, looked rather displeased. He had just invited her to have sex, and now he was calling another girl right in front of her. Wasn't that a bit too much of a jerk? Okay, sure, how about tomorrow evening at 6? I'll pick you up from your place then. Do you have time? Bai Ye said with a smile, holding the phone. Great, of course I have time, Gwen said from home, secretly giving a victory sign with excitement. Hanging up the phone, Bai Ye heard Camilla's somewhat resentful voice in his ear. You're not at the club tomorrow, aren't you afraid I'll escape? Or are you planning to lock me up with iron chains beforehand? Don't worry, I'll take you with me to the movies. If I hear you leave within 200 meters of me, your head will explode in 3 seconds, Bai Ye stated calmly. The modified stamping press would be ready for use in the next few days. For Bai Ye, Camilla and Peter Parker were no longer needed, killing her or letting her go was fine. However, letting Camilla go might cause him some trouble, so if she dared to escape, he'd kill her. Are you threatening me? Camilla said unhappily, but her pupils contracted the next moment. Crack, with a crisp sound of shattering tiles, a violent gust of wind rushed in. Before he could react, Bai Ye's body had already blurred into blur behind her, grabbing her by the scruff of her neck and lifting her up like a wildcat. Bai Ye said indifferently, this was just a warning. What can you do now? Don't forget your status as a prisoner. As he spoke, his smooth, jade-like right hand gently touched Camilla's heart. With just a slight exertion, he could pierce the vampire's life-storing heart. Bai Ye's tone was full of the oppressive air of a superior towards a slave. Sparing your life is already showing mercy. Don't be ungrateful, little kitty. With that, Bai Ye gently set Camilla down, stretching. Feeling his steel-like muscles gradually relax as he stretched, he yawned and walked towards a corner. Camilla, meanwhile, was drenched in cold sweat, looking down at the ground. From where Bai Ye had just stood behind her, more than a dozen clear cracks had appeared. These were all footprints left by Bai Ye's legs as he moved at high speed, but all Camilla heard was a crisp cracking sound. Because Bai Ye had focused primarily on training his strength these past few days, he hadn't shown any signs of improving his speed. Until just now, Camilla had thought Bai Ye had simply become stronger. This movement speed is already much faster than that mutant named Peter Parker, Camilla thought with lingering fear. Meanwhile, Bai Ye, bored, lay comfortably on the floor in the corner, peacefully falling into his second deep sleep since acquiring the attribute panel. Looking at the sleeping Bai Ye, Camilla remained silent for a moment, then sighed helplessly, thinking about his explosive progress over the past few days. Only now did she truly accept her fate as a prisoner, no longer considering unrealistic ideas like escape, and obediently turned off the lights in the gym to prevent them from affecting her master's sleep. Name: Bai Ye. Lifespan: 18/5000. Strength: 2.4 plus 0.3, strength 28 tons, maximum speed 114 meters per second, constitution: 2.4 plus 0.3, purple cloud divine skill cultivation speed: 34 seconds per wisp of internal energy, spirit: 2.3 plus charisma: 1.4 plus available attribute points: 0.2 talent 1, endless, no upper limit, no bottleneck, no weakness, effort leads to strength. Talent 2, the composure of the strong: for every 1 point of attribute increased, 0.1 available attribute points are added. Description: note, information in parentheses is not visible to the protagonist. Recently, due to part-time work, updates may be unstable. I'm not abandoning this project. Chapter 43: The History of the Vampire Clan. Early morning, New York, JFK Airport. A passenger plane from Ohio made an emergency landing. As the cabin door slowly opened, a pale-skinned man wearing sunglasses disembarked with a flow of people. Amidst the surging disembarkation, the man in sunglasses took a deep, almost ecstatic breath, feeling as if he were surrounded by a sumptuous feast. But the passengers around him only felt a chill, as if they were being watched by a predator, yet they didn't know where the danger came from. The man in sunglasses surveyed the surrounding food, then suddenly sighed helplessly. Ever since he was forced to sign a contract with a human government, those carefree days of getting by were gone forever. Hopefully, that mixed-race junior will bring me good news this time, he thought to himself. It was bright daylight, the sun shining directly on his face, but a thin layer of sunscreen kept it away. Gently pulling his black coat tighter, the man silently followed the crowd towards the city center. On the street, the man glanced to his right, sensing something. On another passenger plane from Bangkok, a similarly pale man stepped out of the cabin. Their eyes met, they nodded slightly to each other, and then parted ways. Meanwhile, vampires like the man in sunglasses had been arriving from all over the world throughout the day, invited to witness the arrival of the blood god. In New York City, Matt, just discharged from the hospital, was undergoing rehabilitation training. Beside him, the Punisher was sharing the intelligence he had gathered over the past few days. I found a vampire's hideout. For some reason, their demand for blood has increased dramatically these past few days. They're definitely preparing for something. So what are you planning to do? Matt asked while doing push-ups. You don't expect me to single-handedly storm their lair and fight them, do you? Do you think I'm an idiot? The Punisher, of course, understood Matt's sarcasm. With their current street-smart hero strength, they could barely handle a single vampire unarmed. Storming their lair would be suicide. The situation has gone beyond what we can handle. I just want to eliminate evil. The means by which I do so are irrelevant, the Punisher said calmly. What do you mean? Matt was slightly taken aback. Just call the police and let the authorities handle these problems, the Punisher said. You don't mean to get the NYPD involved, do you? Matt asked, his lips twitching. Of course not. How could you even think of that? We'd be better off handling this ourselves than relying on the NYPD. I'm talking about certain secret organizations within the military and government. If we just give them information about the vampire stronghold, I'm sure they won't stand idly by, the Punisher said. Hearing this, Matt thought for a moment and nodded in agreement, finding the Punisher's suggestion reasonable. After their previous conversation with the Blade, who had expertise in vampire history, they actually had some understanding of it. Decades ago, these vampires, relying on their superior physical abilities, were incredibly arrogant, looking down on all other races and even maintaining a strict hierarchy within their own ranks, creating purebloods and mixed bloods. However, this was an era of rapid technological advancement, and the vampires' arrogance angered Germany, which was then embroiled in conflict with the Jews. Unsurprisingly, they were both added to the list of those slaughtered. Faced with ultraviolet lamps and silver bullets invented by the Germans, and through sheer numbers, the German army easily decimated the million-strong vampire population, reducing them to less than a tenth of their former numbers. Many more were forced into concentration camps for research. The brutality of the killings even led to the loss of the vampire's ancient written language. In the German prisoner of war camps of that time, distinguishing Jews from vampires was simple: those with a heartbeat or Jews, those without were vampires. Finally, the vampires, driven to desperation by the slaughter, had no choice but to back down. After signing a non-aggression pact with the Allies, they joined forces to fight against fascism. After the war, with only a fraction of the vampires remaining, they naturally lacked the courage to confront humans, living a relatively lawless life in the shadows, utterly terrified by the German slaughter. In Matt's eyes, if these guys could be crushed by the army decades ago, then with today's rapidly advancing technology, there was no reason for them to fail. He believed that with official intervention, things would turn out well. Soon, the two superheroes easily infiltrated the city government offices. After shoving a pistol into the mouth of the New York City mayor, who was currently struggling with the election, the mayor, who was extremely concerned about the city's security, immediately uploaded the vampire investigation report, which quickly caught the attention of a department under the United Nations. Above a certain sea area in the United States, a massive, invisible steel structure hovered in the sky. What are these vampires up to? Vampires from all over the world are gathering in New York on a massive scale. Are they planning a war? Inside the steel structure, a black man with one eye covered by an eye patch frowned as he looked at the documents handed to him by an intelligence officer. The contents of the documents were truly terrifying. When they first noticed the investigation report, SHIELD initially thought it was a minor matter and didn't pay much attention, only allocating a small number of personnel to investigate further. They discovered that the situation was far more serious than the Punisher had described. At least tens of thousands of vampires had gathered in New York. Faced with this group of violent, blood-feeding beings, a riot could easily break out, far exceeding their initial warning limits. "Sir, should we send someone to investigate their movements?" Carlson asked, but Nick Fury gently shook his head. "No need for investigation. These vampires have crossed the line recently. If we weren't afraid of their dying counterattack, we would have wiped them out long ago. Let General Ross go and warn them. Isn't Ross's biological research project hitting a bottleneck lately because of the escaped test subjects? It's good to give them something to do." Nick Fury spoke casually, but all the agents present understood what sending Ross over meant. Faced with a well-prepared, fully armed human army coming to cause trouble, those vampires who seemed to have superhuman physical abilities were nothing more than chickens and dogs. Chapter 44 Sacrificial Ritual. At 7 o'clock in the evening, a full moon hung in the clouds. Camilla, applying sunscreen, squatted outside dejectedly. This was her first time going out in over 10 days. Not far from her, Bai Ye, dressed in a casual suit, gently rang the doorbell, one hand in his pocket. With a soft tinkle, the door opened immediately. Gwen, neatly dressed in a bright yellow hooded jacket and light blue straight-leg pants, pushed open the door and waved happily at Bai Ye at the door. Perfect timing. "I'm all ready. Let's go out together." "Yes, let's go eat first. I remember there's a pretty good Chinese restaurant nearby. I wonder if you'd like to try it." Bai Ye smiled and took the girl's soft right hand in his, asking. Gwen blushed slightly, surprised by Bai Ye's initiative. "Well, okay, I can give it a try, then let's try it. After dinner, we can go shopping for a bit and then see a movie. Speaking of which, I still don't know which movie you're taking me to see today," Bai Ye said with a smile. He then gently took Gwen's arm and led her towards the Chinese restaurant, while gesturing behind his back with his left hand for Camilla to follow. Sigh. Camilla sighed helplessly, standing up like a devoted follower, staying within a 200-meter radius of Bai Ye, not venturing out of his control. 200 meters was the safe distance Bai Ye had set for himself. At his current speed, he could strike any target within that range within 3 seconds if he wanted to, which was why he wasn't afraid Camilla would escape. "By the way, I invited you out today. Chief George won't be angry, will he?" Holding Gwen's hand, Bai Ye turned his head and asked with a smile. Gwen's heart skipped a beat at his handsome face and gentle smile. She quickly looked away from Bai Ye's face, her gaze flustered. "No, Dad said I could just come back early after the movie. The security situation in New York City has been a bit bad lately, so going back early is understandable. I heard there was a gangster slaying serial killer recently. Has the chief caught him? Bai Ye asked calmly. According to psychological research, a large proportion of murderers return to the scene of their crime to observe their work, and Bai Ye seemed to be doing the same. Hearing Bai Ye ask about the case, Gwen gently shook her head. That serial killer disappeared 2 days after he appeared. We haven't heard from him in a long time. He's probably hiding. Is that so? Bai Ye nodded thoughtfully. It seemed the police hadn't connected him to him. But that was normal. Who would associate him with a bald, scarred, disfigured man? Of course, as time passed, Bai Ye was no longer worried about murder cases. He had simply discovered that his strength was improving far faster than expected. A human like him, capable of delivering a punch weighing 20 tons and traveling at 100 meters per second, would possess terrifying destructive power in a city. Unless the US government were willing to drop a nuclear bomb on New York, conventional individual firearms, given enough time to react, would be unable to lock onto him. Even in a sneak attack, Bai Ye had 0.2 free attribute points, allowing him to instantly recover from any injury after allocating them. This was also why he dared to directly pursue the police chief's daughter. In downtown New York, at the base of a massive building constructed of white marble, 12 enormous stone pillars carved with ancient patterns stood in 4 directions. Countless pale-skinned men and women gathered there, all their gazes fixed on the man in the center. Fellow vampires, our race has endured enough oppression from humans. I am weary of the various negative effects brought by the vampire body, but after today, all of this will be over, the vampire deacon shouted to all the vampires present, spreading his arms wide. According to the deciphered ancient texts, the original vampires had no weaknesses. On the night of the full moon, a sacrifice of 12 pure-blooded vampires, combined with the blood of a daywalker, can summon the blood god to bless us, allowing us to walk normally in the sunlight, and I, as the progenitor of a new lineage of vampires, will bestow upon you the embrace, covering the genetic defects in your tolerance to sunlight and silver. As Deacon envisioned this future, the breathing of the many men and women present began to quicken. The reason they had been suppressed by humans before was because their own defects were too fatal, but if, as Deacon said, they truly became superhuman beings without weaknesses, then vampires would once again stand at the top of the food chain. Of course, most importantly, if this method of sacrifice was correct, it wouldn't just be a new lineage of vampires, but countless main lines of vampires emerging, each replicating the ritual. On the scene, looking at the vampires he had incited, Deacon laughed triumphantly. These people had no idea that sacrifices could not only be repeated in number, but also that the same vampires could be sacrificed multiple times. 12 pure-blood vampires plus a daywalker equals a new vampire lineage. What would happen if this act were repeated again? According to the ancient texts, similar sacrifices could be repeated almost indefinitely. At this moment, in his eyes, these people present were not his own kind, but merely resources for his advancement. This was why he risked being discovered to gather vampires from all over the world. To fight against a human government, at least 5 purification rituals must be performed tonight, requiring at least 60 pure-blood vampires. These should be enough, Deacon thought. With a wave of his hand, 12 pure-blood vampires were quickly selected. Lacking the power to resist, they were placed beneath the ritual pillars, and the ritual began under the watchful eyes of all the vampires present. Above this space, the Blade Warrior, imprisoned for days, had his wrists severed by a sharp blade, blood flowing through pipes into the sacrificial ritual. Is this the gathering place of those vampire bastards? Meanwhile, outside the building, a man in a U.S. military uniform, a cigarette dangling from his lips, murmured, gazing at the ancient structure before him. Behind him stood thousands of fully armed U.S. soldiers. No need for conversation once inside. Take down every vampire with tranquilizer darts, Ross ordered. Immediately, a large contingent of soldiers strode inside. Chapter 45 I saw you. Clatter. 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 A large contingent of American soldiers filed into the pure white building constructed of marble, searching the interior for their target. These soldiers wore uniforms equipped with fluorescent lights, gas masks, and thermal imaging cameras. They carried water tanks resembling pesticides on their backs and gripped specially made firearms tightly. The hard soles of their shoes made a crisp sound on the ground, creating a strong sense of oppression. Soon, one of them bumped into several vampires guarding the perimeter. Seeing the large human army, The vampire bared his fangs and threatened, "Human army, you are." Without communication, without hesitation, the American soldiers had no intention of negotiating. After confirming through their thermal imaging that the humanoid creature before them did not have a normal body temperature, 4 or 5 specially formulated tranquilizer darts mixed with a trace amount of garlic were fired from the dark muzzles. Swoosh, the bullet struck the vampire's body, and he quickly collapsed, trembling and unable to resist. Ignoring the unconscious vampire before them, the American soldiers strode over his body and continued their advance. According to General Ross's orders, their mission was simply to control or eliminate the vampires. The cleanup would be handled by the logistics support following behind. After suppressing individual vampires with firepower, their movements were noticed by the larger group of vampires within 3 minutes. Damn humans! Seeing the fully armed American soldiers before them, someone immediately reported back into the building. Hearing that they were surrounded by the army, long-buried memories of humiliation began to resurface. Seeing Deacon intently performing the ritual in the center, to ensure the ritual wasn't disrupted, half of the vampires immediately went out to resist. Soon, thousands of vampires gathered in the center of the building began to rush out to block the army. With numbers exceeding 1,000, the densely packed vampire teams began to organize a counterattack, the blazing killing intent in the eyes of the massive numbers of vampires overwhelming the army. The operation has been exposed, and we have enough experimental materials. Activate Plan 2, the officer calmly stated this, and as soon as he finished speaking, countless fluorescent tubes covering the officers' uniforms emitted a faint blue light. But besides the visible blue light, the tubes also emitted ultraviolet light hundreds of times stronger than sunlight. It was only because the ultraviolet wavelength was invisible to the human eye that it emitted a faint blue light mixed within it. Ultraviolet lamps, seeing the lights emanating from the soldiers, the vampires' murderous intent turned to deep fear, but before they could utter a word, the blinding light pierced them like razor-sharp blades. The so-called sunscreen they had applied might offer some protection from the sun for a short time, but against the intense ultraviolet light, it instantly turned to ashes. Countless vampires in the front ranks were reduced to ashes in a single exchange. Only a few, their bodies completely covered, survived the initial onslaught, only to fall unsurprisingly to the spray of concentrated garlic-infused mist. "Just vampire bastards," an officer scoffed, looking at the vampires on the scene. "So full of holes, yet they dare call themselves vampires? They're easier to deal with than mutants, even easier than a black criminal." But before he could finish speaking, a vampire grabbed a boulder and hurled it like a giant axe, smashing the head of a soldier beside the officer. Although the soldier was immediately pierced by a silver bullet, this marked the first casualty of the battle. Damn bastard! He dared to resist instead of surrendering. Use force. The officer, still shaken, was overcome with rage. The next moment, flashbangs were thrown from the American soldier's arms. With the release of intense ultraviolet light, vampires within a few meters of the blast radius were reduced to ashes. Faced with the fully armored vampires, massive amounts of concentrated, atomized garlic essence began to pour from the tanks on their backs, filling the air like an invisible grim reaper. All the breathing vampires collapsed in agony, clutching their mouths and noses, their internal organs failing and dying. Humans and vampires have different weaknesses. This invisible garlic essence mist, enveloping the building, was only extremely lethal to vampires, aside from causing choking, allowing the U.S. military to use it without restraint. Every passageway leading to the outside was filled with mist, ensuring no vampire could escape. Ross had decided to wipe out these tens of thousands of vampires in one fell swoop, using the same methods the Germans had employed, only more efficient and concise. While the vampires outside were being slaughtered by humans, the ritual inside the building reached its crucial moment. The Daywalker's blood dripped through pipes onto the foreheads of 12 purebloods. Through this pure blood sacrifice, a terrifying being from another dimension was located in this universe. Because of the faint bloodline link between vampires and higher dimensional beings, that dimensional demon god could observe everything through the vampire's eyes. The first thing to attract attention was the annihilation of countless vampire chickens by the human army. Watching the vampires being surrounded and killed, the higher dimensional being felt no anger, only amusement. As the price, or rather, the deal, for entering this universe, an invisible wave was transmitted through lightning to the 12 sacrificial vampires. The blood goddess, as the progenitor of all vampires in the multiverse, could easily control each of her descendants through bloodline suppression. The instant the lightning struck the sacrificial vampires, their pure-blooded bodies exploded, transforming into purest bloodline energy that detached from their bodies and flew towards Dickon in the center. Under the expectant gazes of every vampire present, countless souls repeatedly pierced Dickon's body, the pure essence acting as nourishment, altering Dickon's hybrid bloodline. The inherent disadvantages in his bloodline were completely eradicated, and both his physical attributes and healing abilities were constantly improving. However, what happened afterward was no longer of concern to that dimensional demon. In the Marvel multiverse, countless sacrificial rituals occur every moment, but most of them cannot even escape his attention. They are merely a mass exposition of power. Perhaps this universe will be the same in the future. Before leaving, the unknown being observed the world one last time through the eyes of each vampire. But the scene she saw through the eyes of one of her descendants made her mind, which was about to withdraw, freeze in place. Outside the movie theater, Bai Ye was checking the tickets while holding Gwen's wrist when he felt a chill run down his spine. He subconsciously turned around and saw Camilla staring at him with bloodshot eyes not far behind him. Chapter 46 The Mad Dog Unleashed. Outside the movie theater, Bai Ye couldn't help but shudder under Camilla's gaze, as if he were being watched by some natural enemy. What's wrong with this woman? Bai Ye frowned slightly, instinctively stepping in front of Gwen. Bai Ye, what's wrong? Gwen noticed Bai Ye's movement and looked up in confusion, only to see his extremely serious expression. I don't know. You go into the movie theater first, there might be danger here, Bai Ye said in a low voice, sensing Camilla's unusual state. Oh, Gwen looked thoughtfully at the beautiful woman staring at them from afar, her mind filled with countless guesses, but she still obediently went into the movie theater. This physique must be transformed into a bloodline. The dimensional demon god's gaze passed through Camilla's eyes to Bai Ye, her heart filled with astonishment. In her observation, Bai Ye was like a human-shaped sun walking in the darkness. Although his strength was unremarkable, his 2.8 physique brought immortality and his talent, thousands of times greater than ordinary people, all of which made her take notice. Such heaven-defying talent, if transformed into a bloodline, under my careful nurturing, could definitely become a combat force no less than mine within hundreds of thousands of years. Looking at the extremely conspicuous man in her line of sight, the blood god's greed was almost uncontrollable. She had only come down to take a look on a whim, but unexpectedly encountered such a tempting figure. Although she was extremely lusting after Bai Ye's body, she knew that a small horse couldn't pull a large cart. Even if she could control the body of a descendant with her own bloodline, Camilla's physique was absolutely no match for the man before her, so she decided to call for help. Seeing Bai Ye approaching with a face full of vigilance and killing intent, the blood god quickly severed her connection with Camilla to avoid alerting him. The next moment, Camilla's consciousness regained control of her body, and she looked up to see Bai Ye grabbing her by the neck and lifting her up. What's wrong with you? Camilla was completely bewildered. How could Bai Ye have been standing in front of her and lifting her up in the blink of an eye? You don't know what you just did, Bai Ye questioned the bewildered woman. Did vampires also suffer from some kind of schizophrenia? Just now? I think I sensed the descent of the blood god, Camilla said thoughtfully. The sudden clap of thunder in downtown New York City had made her blood surge, and when she came to her senses, she found herself being grabbed by Bai Ye. The blood god, Bai Ye was speechless. Just mentioning that thing told him where the Blade movie plot was at. But was this scene in the original plot? Or was it a plot breakdown caused by the fusion of multiple worldviews? At this moment, many people in the surrounding streets were already looking at them with curiosity. Bai Ye hesitated for a moment, then let go and explained, you seemed to be possessed just now. You weren't in a good state. Wait here for me for a bit, and then come back with me. Aren't you going to see the movie? In this situation, what's the point of watching a movie? Whatever it is, we'll talk about it after tonight. After saying that, Bai Ye turned and walked into the movie theater. At this moment, in downtown New York, hordes of vampires were reduced to ashes by the army's slaughter. In the center of the building, Deacon raised his hands, feeling the immense power surging within him. The bloodline exchanged with 12 pure bloods had replaced his blood with that of a new progenitor of the vampire branch. Deacon, did the ritual succeed? A vampire asked anxiously. The human army outside is already at the gate. If nothing changes, we'll all be killed here. Of course it succeeded, Deacon grinned, glancing at each pure blood present. With a slight movement, he transformed into a blur, swiftly rushing out of the stone gate. He planned to convert every pure-blood vampire present into his own power after dealing with a human army outside. Outside the gate, the first wave of troops successfully arrived, advancing all the way. Just before they were about to enter, an imperceptible figure flashed past. The figure instantly passed through countless layers of misty garlic essence and ultraviolet light. On either side of the trajectory, the heads of hundreds of American soldiers shot into the air in an instant, gushing forth a torrent of blood mist that instantly filled the passageway, bringing with it a nauseating, pungent stench. What happened? Who did this? Damn mutants. This is definitely a mutant conspiracy. All on alert. All on alert. The scene was chaotic, with casualties dozens of times greater than before, and the invisible enemy throwing the entire American force into disarray. Because the attack was so sudden, and with hundreds lost despite prior preparations, no one suspected the attackers were vampires. They assumed it was a mutant attack. Then, a maniacal laugh echoed from above the crowd. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound. Deacon stood atop a boulder. After inhaling the rich, bloody stench in the air with ecstasy, his pupils and the whites of his eyes were completely bloodshot. He arrogantly surveyed the American soldiers present. Deacon lightly leaped down from the boulder, intending to deliver a victory speech, but the panicked army dared not give him a chance. Their silver bullets were instantly aimed at him, unleashing a hail of bullets. Bang 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 bang. In an instant, gunfire erupted. The massive number of bullets struggled to penetrate Deacon's tough skin, only to be firmly trapped by his muscles, unable to advance further. Completely unprepared, Deacon allowed the silver bullets to pierce every inch of his skin. The hail lasted for over 10 seconds. When they felt it was enough, Deacon, his body riddled with bullets, raised his hands, straining every muscle in his body, the powerful force instantly forcing the bullets out of his skin. Before the horrified eyes of countless American soldiers, hundreds of bullets ricocheted back at a speed no less than when they were fired, piercing their bodies. Deacon remained standing, his crimson blood flowing silently, covering every bullet hole in his body, instantly restoring him to his original state. Just as he bared his fangs, preparing to slaughter everyone present, his gaze involuntarily turned eastward. There was only a white wall before him, yet a powerful pull emanated from that direction. It was as if someone within him was telling him he had to turn a man in that direction into a vampire, even if it meant death. The very next second this thought formed in his mind, the ground trembled slightly. Before his bewildered eyes, the remaining thousands of vampires poured out of the stone gate, surging eastward. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" Deacon shouted, suppressing the intense desire within him, feeling for the first time that things were spiraling out of his control. Chapter 47 Ancient One. On the scene, thousands of vampires had lost their minds. Whether pure-blooded or half-blood, they all rushed eastward like mad dogs. "Are you all crazy? The air outside is thick with garlic essence. Are you out of your minds?" Deacon roared in distress. These vampires were all resources for his advancement. But as soon as he finished speaking, Deacon froze. Although these rushing vampires were howling and their skin was being reduced to ashes by the various damages in the air, they were not nearly as fragile as the other vampires he had encountered before. Have these people also undergone transformation? Deacon thought incredulously. He then counted the number of vampires on the scene. Indeed, there were about half fewer, only a little over 2,000, and they were also faster than before. Clearly, they had also undergone a transformation he didn't know about, exchanging half their lives for a significant weakening of their weaknesses. Damn it, what on earth happened to the East? Deacon muttered to himself, angry but helpless. But besides his helplessness, the American soldiers facing this army of vampires were filled with deep fear. Seeing these vampires swarming out, their superhuman physical abilities, weakened by the reduced damage from their weapons, truly came into play, making them like thousands of blade warriors. To heal their wounds, these vampires relentlessly attacked the American soldiers, those previously slaughtered now becoming death itself, draining their bodies dry. However, because their target wasn't this, they only drank enough blood to restore their energy before stopping, leaving only a few hundred men drained. After replenishing their strength, these vampires rushed out of the temple, still running eastward without any rhyme or reason, leaving behind only corpses and a bewildered Deacon and the American soldiers. Inside SHIELD, Nick Fury frowned as he listened to Ross's report. "What did you say? The vampires all stormed out of the sanctuary, killing thousands of your soldiers? And now they're running towards the outskirts of the city? How did you stop them?" "How should I know? Those vampire bastards suddenly became immune to silver and ultraviolet radiation, and they ran like madmen towards the commercial district. Outside the sanctuary, General Ross watched the vampires charging out in his heavily damaged troops, his heart bleeding. These were his own troops, a quarter of them were dead. At that moment, atop the vampire sanctuary, a bald woman in a yellow robe stood atop the building, looking at the passage leading to other dimensions. The gem on the Ancient One's chest glowed with a soft green light. Looking through the passage, she addressed the woman at the other end. "You've crossed the line, Blood God. I still have some unfinished business in this world. I'll leave immediately after I'm done," the Blood God said, looking at the Ancient One with a pleading expression. This wasn't her home turf, war wouldn't end well. To this, the Ancient One gently shook her head. "I know your purpose, but I also need someone to guard this universe for me. He is the best among us, and I cannot give him to you." As she finished speaking, facing the Blood God's murderous gaze, the Time Stone, which had previously only glowed faintly, burst into a blinding light. Past and future, one after another, different versions of the Ancient One emerged from the void, blocking the entrance to the dimensional portal. The Ancient One in the present, possessing the Time Stone, gently flicked her ring, and beneath the power and space stones of SHIELD and the alien planets, a spatial portal crackling with orange sparks suddenly appeared. The Ancient One opened her hands, and two stones, one blue and one purple, automatically fell into her palms, their brilliance complementing the emerald time stone on her chest, dazzling all who beheld them. In an instant, 3 of the 6 infinity stones coveted by countless people, the Power Stone, the Space Stone, and the Time Stone, were all gathered in the Ancient One's hands. The Blood Goddess on the other side of the dimensional portal looked as if she'd swallowed a fly. Looking at the Ancient One in her 3 divine armors, she knew she was likely going to return empty-handed. More disgusting to her than giving someone hope only to crush it was the hope itself. That night, Bai Ye was walking home with Camilla when he turned his head, listening intently to a distant commotion. It sounded like thousands of people were rushing towards them in a jogging exercise. "What's going on?" Bai Ye became alert, turning around to see a dense swarm of vampires charging towards them. "It's him. It's him. Catch him and turn him into a vampire. We must catch him." Thoughts arose in the vampires' minds, manipulating their reason. The weaker the vampire, the more deeply influenced by these thoughts. In the densely packed commercial street, the crowds blocking their way were swept aside by the vampires, crashing against the walls with cries of agony. The entire commercial district descended into chaos. These vampires are acting like they've gone mad. Who offended them? Bai Ye's gaze swept across the chaos hundreds of meters ahead. He decided to avoid them for now, grabbing the somewhat surprised Camilla and preparing to leave. With a light leap, Bai Ye and Camilla reached the rooftop. Then he saw the vampires all looking up at him, their steps shifting as they ran towards him. Bai Ye's initial attempt to dodge only confirmed their target, this man they wanted to convert. What the hell? Is their target Camilla, or me? Remembering Camilla's strange behavior earlier, Bai Ye immediately released her and took a few steps back. Through their gazes, he finally confirmed that these guys were after him. Camilla also realized the problem and looked at Bai Ye in surprise, asking, "Why are they looking for you? How should I know? I didn't do anything." "Maybe it was to save you," Bai Ye said helplessly. Seeing the vampires charging towards him, he waved his hand lightly and said, "Don't move here. I'll deal with them first, then we'll talk." As he spoke, the massive vampire army was already upon them. With superhuman strength, they leaped onto the rooftops and lunged at their targets. Thud! In the blink of an eye, the bodies of 3 vampires exploded, a terrifying rain of blood bursting forth and being swept away by the howling wind, pulling several leaping vampires off the roof. Bai Ye maintained his punching stance, spiderweb-like cracks spreading across the tiles within a 2 or 3 meter radius beneath his feet. Facing the surging vampire army, Bai Ye took a deep breath, stomped the ground, and charged into them like a cannonball. Chapter 48. When the time is right, heaven and earth lend their strength. Boom, boom, boom. Deep, muffled sounds, like cannonballs exploding, echoed through the streets of New York City. Countless vampires roared and charged towards Bai Ye, but to him at this moment, it was far too slow. Looking at the layers of figures before him, Bai Ye didn't waste any words. He threw a punch, striking the skull of a vampire in front of him. With a cloud of blood mist rising, the head of the leading vampire exploded instantly. Fragments of skull flew everywhere, the pressure comparable to a high-pressure water gun sending all the vampires in his path flying. He casually grabbed the wrist of a vampire behind him, squeezed it tightly, and swung it. The terrifying momentum easily tore apart the vampire's arm, sending him flying and knocking down many others. Before the vampires behind him could even approach, Bai Ye tensed all his muscles and leaped lightly. With a burst of blood, Bai Ye's body, harder than steel, smashed through more than a dozen vampire bodies, arriving at another battlefield. Although these vampires possessed remarkable regenerative abilities, they couldn't withstand having their heads smashed into blood and their hearts crushed into meat patties. Even though Bai Ye had no weapons to counter them, relying on his iron fists, which were 3 times harder than steel, vampire after vampire was being torn to pieces and killed by him. This indiscriminate slaughter was even less intense than his usual training. On average, 1 punch was enough to kill a vampire, and he could wipe them all out in less than 3,000 punches. If I fight like this, will I have to pay compensation after the battle? Bai Ye still had the energy to mentally criticize himself amidst the fighting. While fighting, he also observed the vampires' expressions and found that these guys were completely irrational, showing no fear of their companions' deaths, only a desire to attack him. With a casual flick of his wrist, Bai Ye cleaved a vampire in 2, then kicked another, smashing its head. He asked, "How about we talk? Why are you targeting me like this?" With another wave of his hand, he severed another vampire's head. Bai Ye reiterated, "You can state your demands. If this continues, I'll kill you all." In the battle, headless and heartless bodies were sent flying like ragdolls by Bai Ye's blows, only to fall limply to the ground. At SYNOPSIS, Nick Fury watched this scene through the monitors, astonished by the man's incredible speed, which even the surveillance cameras struggled to capture. "Director, should we call Professor X to clean up the mess?" Coulson asked. "No, it's unnecessary now," Nick Fury muttered, his eyes fixed on the figure on the monitor. "Is this guy a mutant? Or a superhuman?" In his assessment, Bai Ye, in terms of combat prowess, whether in terms of strength, speed, or defense, didn't seem particularly strong on its own. What's terrifying is that this opponent has no weaknesses. In terms of physical abilities, he's a well-rounded fighter, even more threatening than some level 4 mutants. Keep in mind that even level 5 mutants are mostly strong in only one particular trait, and can be killed by bullets when caught off guard. "Have you found his information?" Nick Fury asked Coulson. "Director, according to the data investigation, this teenager is named Bai Ye, an American of Chinese descent, currently attending Midtown High School in New York. His past isn't exactly glaring. He's been involved in organized crime, and there are 7 or 8 robberies that could reasonably be suspected of being his involvement." With SHIELD's powerful investigative capabilities, Bai Ye's information was quickly uncovered. Coulson frowned as he looked at Bai Ye's file on the computer. "It's certain that this teenager has a very strong criminal tendency. No, he's already committed crimes. I personally don't recommend recruiting him." Nick Fury expressionlessly flipped through the files before him and said, "Seal all of his files for now. Only agents at level 9 or higher can access them." Coulson hesitated for a moment, then muttered yes, and proceeded to seal Bai Ye's file. Watching Bai Ye rampage through the surveillance footage, Nick Fury tapped the table in front of him lightly, his mind racing. After a long while, he said, "Here's what we'll do. Have an agent take a team of reporters to interview them, set the tone, and prevent the public opinion from getting too out of control. I'll go ask the higher-ups for their opinion." Coulson nodded to indicate he understood. That night, not only SHIELD, but countless other forces were watching this place closely. At Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, a bald man in a wheelchair was using his powerful mental abilities to directly lock onto this entire neighborhood. In a base on the outskirts of New York State, an elderly man wearing a metal helmet watched the carnage on the screen with appreciative eyes. 5 minutes later, Bai Ye stood expressionless, the air thick with the stench of blood. Blood stained every inch of the surrounding ground, yet his body remained spotless. The powerful shockwave from his body forced most of the blood out of his system. The remaining blood was blocked by the 70 years of internal energy from his purple cloud divine skill, preventing any blood from reaching him. Supported by this internal energy, Bai Ye's outer garment remained completely undamaged, still in its original white attire. Looking at the pervasive stench of blood in the streets and the prying eyes of the people hiding in the shadows, Bai Ye gently crushed the last vampire head in his hand and turned to leave. He knew that tonight, he would face a storm of public criticism and bloodshed. But just as he took a step, a jeep stopped him in front of him. The door opened, and an elderly man in military uniform stepped out. "What's up?" Bai Ye asked. As he spoke, he noticed the nameplate on the old man's uniform, Thaddeus E. Ross, the officer from the movies who had chased the Hulk so fiercely. "Kid, you've done me a huge favor. If you need anything, just let me know," Ross said, looking at Bai Ye with a serious expression. It was indeed true. The army's losses were manageable, but if those thousands of vampires had spread throughout the city causing massive casualties, he would have had to resign immediately. With that, Ross handed over his business card, saying, "Call this number if you need anything." Bai Ye reluctantly took the card, thinking the visitor was up to no good. Seeing Bai Ye accept the card, Ross waved, "I won't bother you anymore. Remember to make a good impression on the media. I'll treat you to dinner this weekend." "The media?" Bai Ye asked, puzzled. He could already hear the sounds of countless cars approaching. As these vehicles stopped in front of him, countless microphones were thrust directly at him. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49 Mutants Are Humans Too. Director, Carlson says the reporters are ready. What kind of statement should we release? Say vampires have gone out of control and are attacking humans, Agent Hill asked beside Nick Fury, only to be met with a refusal from Fury? Of course not. If we announce the existence of vampires, people will wonder why they didn't know about this race before. Then, upon further investigation, the agreements between various governments and vampires will be exposed. After that, they will know that the government tacitly approves of vampires parasitizing human society. This will severely damage the reputation of various countries. More seriously, it might encourage some people seeking immortality to deliberately seek out vampires for conversion. That's the key point. Hill paused, not expecting that releasing a simple statement would be so serious. She cautiously asked, "Then how should we release the statement?" "Just like before, blame it on mutants," Nick Fury said. "Anyway, mutants have diverse abilities. Just say that these people are all monsters converted by mutants. Now that we've killed the mutants, nothing like this will happen again. Should we blame it on the mutants?" But Professor Charles might have some objections, Hill inquired. They had even considered asking the X-Men for help when the vampire situation spiraled out of control. If Bai Ye hadn't intervened, and the X-Men had actually eliminated all the vampires, then the human authorities would have blamed the X-Men entirely. That would have been too tragic for the mutants. "It's alright, I'll talk to him personally. It's all for the stability of human society, we can only let the mutants suffer a little longer," Nick Fury said. At the scene, Bai Ye stood on the blood-soaked ground. Having just slaughtered his way through, he looked somewhat bewildered at the reporters surrounding him with cameras and microphones practically shoved into his mouth. These reporters arrived way too fast, Bai Ye thought in surprise. Only 5 minutes had passed. Where did they get such a large group of reporters so late at night? Their efficiency was even higher than the NYPD. "No need to explain, we all know you're the hero who just saved the citizens from the mutants," the lead reporter said, leaving Bai Ye even more stunned. Mutants? What are you talking about?" Bai Ye was completely bewildered. "Of course I know. The official announcement just came out saying that an evil mutant used his abilities to turn thousands of innocent civilians into blood-sucking monsters. If it weren't for your help, tens of thousands of people in the city would have perished." Bai Ye felt a cold sweat break out. So it really was all a mutant conspiracy. At the same time, Bai Ye finally understood why mutants had such a bad reputation. Whenever an inexplicable supernatural event occurred, both humans and officials assumed it was the work of mutants. Over time, how could their reputation not be bad? "By the way, are you a mutant?" Suddenly, a reporter asked this soul-searching question. "Of course not. I've already stated that I'm just an ordinary, normal human being," Bai Ye said righteously. He absolutely couldn't choose the wrong side. Statement. Looking at Bai Ye's highly recognizable face, the reporter immediately recognized him. Wasn't this the high school student who saved the bank 10 days ago? Wow, so he had a history of saving people. But at the same time, a new question arose. A reporter, microphone in hand, asked, "You say you're an ordinary human, so how did you become so strong? Can you explain why?" "Of course," Bai Ye replied, "my current strength is entirely due to my innate talent and relentless hard work. If you train as hard as I have, everyone can become a superhero, everyone can become a superhero. The reporters at the scene felt that Bai Ye was talking nonsense, but still maintained their professionalism and asked, "Could you elaborate on the training content?" "No problem," Bai Ye replied. "In a month, my autobiography, Everyone Can Practice Martial Arts, will be published. It details my training methods. As long as you study like me, with time and accumulation, you can become as skilled as me." Bai Ye was advertising right in front of the reporters, leaving them speechless. This advertisement was far too blatant. Feeling that Bai Ye was rambling, they immediately changed the subject, asking, "So, what's your opinion on mutants?" "Mutants? I think mutants are great." Not wanting to offend either humans or mutants, Bai Ye firmly stated, "Mutants are human too, and they're born with all sorts of abilities, allowing them to better contribute to humanity." Unexpectedly, Bai Ye, who had just killed thousands of mutants, would have this attitude. The reporter continued, "But you just thwarted a mutant conspiracy. It's like the difference between black people and niggers. Those who are law-abiding are called black, and those who are immoral are called niggers, which is reasonable, right? Are you suggesting that because one nigger committed a crime, all black people are guilty? You don't have that kind of thought, do you?" Bai Ye retorted, making the reporter break out in a cold sweat. This magical clash between mutants and black people left him completely speechless, only able to laugh awkwardly twice, not daring to press further. Because the reporters interviewing Bai Ye were carrying cameras that were broadcasting live, Bai Ye's conversation was also disseminated to many places through online media. Magneto, watching Bai Ye's statement on the live stream, softened his previously ashen face due to the official statement. He glanced back at the large, modified machines inside the base, remaining silent. Meanwhile, in a tavern, everyone was intently watching Bai Ye's live stream on television. A young girl, bundled up tightly, with a slightly chubby face, watched the broadcast with sparkling eyes. Especially when Bai Ye said that mutants are also human, her resolve was strengthened. She wrapped her coat tighter and walked out of the tavern, disappearing into the snow. After politely dealing with the reporters, Bai Ye turned around and saw Officer George and his officers watching him with complicated expressions not far away. "Good evening, Uncle." "No, Chief George." Bai Ye greeted him with a smile, gently shaking his hand. George asked, "Weren't you going to the movies with Gwen? What about these corpses?" Chapter 50 My 50 Million. "I really don't know." Faced with George's questioning, Bai Ye told the truth. Who knew why those vampires were chasing him all of a sudden? "What about Gwen? Where is she now?" "Gwen? Don't worry, I've already sent her back beforehand," Bai Ye assured him, then leaned closer and said familiarly, "Should we follow procedure and take me back to the police station for questioning? After all, thousands of humans infected by mutants have died." As he spoke, Bai Ye looked around at the surroundings. The ground was stained with blood, and there were still scattered corpses. There were damaged buildings everywhere, and the repair costs would be enormous. "No need. You can go back now. We'll summon you if needed," George said. Thinking of the phone call from General Ross and his superiors, it was clear that regardless of Bai Ye's wishes, they were going to use him as a major propaganda tool to try to suppress the mutant type. Although you won't be held responsible, you might still have to pay a fine for the damage to the surrounding environment. Of course, we'll also give you a reward for your act of bravery and a Medal of Honor as a citizen, George said, leaving Bai Ye speechless. It was too realistic. After a fight, a superhero had to compensate for the damaged streets. "How about I compensate for all of this superhero's losses?" A deep male voice came from beside him. George turned and his expression changed slightly when he saw the newcomer. The newcomer was a super fat man, 2 meters tall, wearing a white suit stretched high by his massive frame, leaning on a thin cane, and walking slowly towards them. "Who is this?" Bai Ye pretended not to know. But after the fat man appeared, he recognized him even faster than George. Wilson Grant Fisk, the underground emperor who ruled the entire American underworld, known as Kingpin. With over 90% muscle, Spider-Man's physical abilities far surpass those of humans. Known as Little Kingpin, he's the nemesis of all street heroes in New York. Tonight is truly a gathering of powerful figures, all with their own agendas and calculations. George's face was somewhat grim as he introduced Bai Ye. "This is Mr. Fisk, a renowned philanthropist in New York and a key contender in this mayoral election." He hadn't intended to recount Kingpin's glorious deeds to Bai Ye, not wanting him to get involved. Little did he know, while he himself was vehemently opposed to drugs, gambling, and prostitution, Bai Ye had long been inextricably linked to them. To his astonishment, Bai Ye greeted him with a smile, saying, "Mr. Fisk, you said you'd help me pay for the street damage, right? I can't possibly accept that, George. Of course, as a member of New York City, I can't let superheroes bleed and weep. Since you've put in the effort, I'll just contribute a small amount of money. It's what I should do." Kingpin, leaning on his cane, smiled, exuding an aura of immense wealth. In fact, he didn't even need to lift a finger. After Bai Ye displayed extraordinary strength as a pure human, the catfish effect would predictably lead to a large number of wealthy people paying to be affiliated with him. That was the case during the bank robbery. Many people tried to contact Bai Ye through various connections, asking for endorsements or other favors. However, Bai Ye's strength was still weak at the time, so he simply cut off all contact. Now, there was no need for such caution. Mr. Fisk's awareness is truly high. No wonder he's a famous philanthropist and benefactor in New York. If everyone had your awareness, New York City's security would definitely improve significantly. Bai Ye began a mutual flattery with Kingpin in front of George. Then, their conversation was coincidentally recorded by a reporter who hadn't left yet, and tomorrow's headlines would surely include "Superheroes Save New York, Mayoral Candidate Generously Donates." I've actually admired superheroes for a long time. I wonder when you have time? I'd like to invite you to dinner, Kingpin said, his fat face beaming with a gentle smile. An outsider would likely mistake him for a kind person. Of course, no problem. I have time now, shall we go? Bai Ye said eagerly, anticipating a possibility. Under George's watchful gaze, Bai Ye and Kingpin chatted more and more congenially, almost to the point of becoming sworn brothers. Just as they were about to get into the black car and leave, he finally couldn't help but say, "Bai Ye, wait a minute, what is it, Chief? Didn't you say we could leave?" Bai Ye asked, turning around. Kingpin, inside the car, also looked over, his smile masking a chilling gaze, hoping the Chief wouldn't ruin his plans. Stared at by both of them, George's lips twitched slightly before he said, "Be careful, of course, then take care, Chief. I'll come to your house to visit Gwen in a few days." Bai Ye comforted him, but these words only stung George more. It would have been better if he hadn't come at all. Upon hearing that Bai Ye had connections with the Chief's family, Kingpin's previously cold gaze instantly softened, and his initial thought of issuing a small warning to the other party vanished instantly. Watching the black sedan slowly drive away, George waved his hand with a heavy heart, signaling his officers to speed up the cleanup. Inside the car, Bai Ye had the car parked in a corner, picked up Camilla who had been waiting for a long time, and then the group drove towards Kingpin's residence. On the way, Bai Ye's previously warm expression gradually returned to calm as he calmly looked at the composed Kingpin beside him and said, "Mr. Fisk, you must have asked me to come here because there's something I can help you with." "Of course, Chief. George mentioned before that I want to run for mayor of New York City this year," Kingpin said humbly. But Bai Ye immediately understood what the other party meant. They just wanted his support, similar to George's previous intentions. I understand, Bai Ye said knowingly, then his expression turned serious. "This is very simple for me. First, VIP me 50 million to see my sincerity, VIP 50 million to see sincerity." Even Kingpin's expression faltered. Looking at Bai Ye's outrageous demand, he was momentarily speechless. "Yes, as long as you give me enough money, I guarantee you'll become the mayor of New York City this time," Bai Ye said confidently. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.